And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, issuesode 8. We are going issue by issue, page by page, panel by panel, theory by theory, blah by blah, through Grant Morrison's Cosmic Conspiracy classic comic book from the 90s, The Invisibles. We're on issue 8. Let's have a quick look at the quality. Good, strong, sturdy little issue. Maybe not that terribly often read. But it's not a bad one. It's really not a bad one, actually. I think it kind of gets... It does this thing where it, like... It really does kind of plant its flag in some ground, and it's like a dumb flag. But, kind of the stuff that this issue's about, kind of subsequently and accidentally, you know, a bit. But, you know, it's art. It's made without intention. It just happens. It gets quite incredible, actually. Quite incredible. There's something very, very, very big and deep and weird happening within these comics. Now, okay, normally we just jump straight in, but we just want to have a little bit of continuity from the previous issue. The problem with going issue by issue is that you kind of, maybe you do miss the joins between the chapters a little bit. So let's just remember, okay, so the last page before we quit last time was this advert for Tales from the Crypt. But immediately before that, so basically at the end, we had this advert for Preacher, which was coming soon. Okay, so just bear that in mind, Preacher. Front cover, good little picture of the head of John the Baptist by Sean Phillips. This came out in like February '95, but this is signed Sean 95. So this is probably he did this. He finished and turned this in like a day before it went to the printers. You know he did. It's a good little cover, kind of creepy, kind of silly look in his eye there, old John the Baptist, as he's kind of gawping at us. But it's a good cover. Bang into it. We've seen this advert on the inside front cover for The Embrace several times before. It's published by White Wolf Publishing. It's like a kind of it's like a vampire story. It's about an ancient vampire who courts a guy called Austin Jacobson, a nightclub bartender. Now, I haven't read this book. I'm not going to read this book, but I like to think of Austin Jacobson as like a rugged, kind of male American hero guy who gets, shall we say, seduced into the slightly queerer world of modern day vampirism, and we're gonna keep that in mind. So what we've seen so far is we've seen Preacher and vampires. Now let's remember there is a vampire in Preacher, isn't there? And we're gonna bang in to page 1. This is a happening in like a fetish club in San Francisco. Remember at the end of the last issue, or near the end of the last issue, King Mob said that him and the Marquis de Sade and Boy were going to take the Marquis's ghost to San Fran, the city of, not the city of angels, that's the other one. What's that San Francisco the city of? Answers on the postcard. But anyway, we start with this kind of like speed rapping from this guy in the gimp mask. I hope that's not an offensive term, but gimp mask is what we're going with. He's kind of talking. He's talking about the counterculture of the 1960s. And he said he apologises for being carried away because he's on speed. And he asked this question. He's talking about Ken Kesey, Tim Leary, the 60s. As you say, they told us all we had to do was get fucked up on LSD and we'd all turn into super people and build the promised land out of rainbows and flowers. Shit, I fell for that shit. When I finally came down, it was 1985. 1985 is like one of the worst years in like pop culture history, right? Reagan, AIDS, it's a bad time, right? More, you know, the counterculture has very much been replaced by, you know, the revolution is like a financial revolution by this point. It's a counter revolution of, you know, family values and mourning in America in the ascendancy, from free love to safe sex, as this guy puts it. And then his mistress kind of calls him back and he says, nice talking to you. Sorry if I got carried away. Speed. Gotta go. But his opening statement is interesting. It will interest us here. He's a big muscly guy, right? He's a big tough guy in a gimp mask, which is why it's kind of, you know, and he's a bit hairy, and that contrasts with his subby kind of role on the next page. He asked this really important question. Who's driving this fucker? You know what I'm saying? Who's in charge of the bus, man? I think about that all the time. Here we are careening towards the crash barrier of the 21st century. Like, nice way to sum up the Invisibles. Here we are, careening towards the crash barrier of the 21st century. We're pretty deep into the 21st century now, and we're still somehow careening into its crash barrier, right? Who's driving this fucker is the key question here. Now, we're talking about Ken Kesey's bus further, yeah? The kind of the LSD-led countercultural revolution of the 60s, the psychedelic revolution, if you like, that this guy's talking about, and which kind of is the wellspring of that Illuminatus bit and this countercultural mien that the Invisibles is very much coming out of, that we've mentioned before. The LSD-ness of it, the acid trip-ness of it, basically came out of this American culture, which had two key figureheads that he meant to see. Timothy Leary, who was a little bit kind of, a little bit more gentlemanly, a little bit more high culture, a little bit more establishment, and Ken Kesey, who was a little bit more rough and ready, and were a bit more kind of took it to the people a little bit more. Ken Kesey had this bus, a yellow bus, a school bus called ᴥThe, and they drove it around the country, getting fucked up on acid and giving acid out to people and holding happenings, little parties. It's all documented in a fun book called, in lots of places, but in a fun book called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by the new journalist Tom Wolfe, which was mentioned in the reading list of the last issue, remember? Fun book, loads of stuff about LSD in there. And I want to know, this guy is asking, who's driving this fucker? I want to know who this guy behind the mask is. It's interesting that you would start with this nicely kind of like nice 6-panel page, really just focuses on him. It's like he's talking directly at us, and yet he's entirely anonymous. He's entirely invisible. That's kind of the whole point, obviously. But he asked this question, who's driving this fucker? And he's insistent that it's an important question. The answer to who drove the bus in real life, the person who drove the Merry Pranksters bus, the Merry Pranksters was the name of Ken Kesey's squad. The guy who drove the bus was a guy called Neil Cassady. He was kind of a counterculture hero from the 50s who 10, 15 years later in the 60s, when Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters was doing their thing, kind of got himself back into it. Not that he'd ever really left. His lifestyle hadn't really ever changed in the intervening period, but you kind of have the early counterculture of the beatniks crashing into the later 60s so that was the 50s, and then you have that crashes into the 60s later hippie counterculture in the body of Neil Cassady, who was in both places and who drove the bus. You know, in On the Road, Jack Kerouac, who wrote On the Road and is kind of like the beatnik writer, talks about what a brilliant driver Cassady was, how he had this kind of innate like instinct for understanding cars and the road. Yeah, this was very important to Kerouac's kind of conception of what the beat man was. It was Cassady. And then, in the 60s, Ken Kesey's like, whoa, I can't believe it. We've bumped into Neil Cassady, this kind of like legend from 10, 15 years back. He loves taking loads of acid, same as us. And he's going to drive this bus for us because he's the best driver. He knows the road. So the driver of the bus, more than it was anybody else, was Neil Cassady. And he was literally be standing behind the bus, going from town to town across America, giving acid to the kids. I'm not sure how far and wide across America they really went, probably not very far, but I'm sure, but they definitely had a good time. The significance of it is inflated beyond like the symbology, and the kind of the story, the legend is more significant and important than what they actually did. It's one of those things. It's pretty clear from here, from this point in history where we are now, not from the comic from 2019, it's pretty clear that Leary and Kesey were getting their acid from the government. That there's a very kind of ambivalent thing around LSD and its liberatory potential and what it did for the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s. On the one hand, it sets you free, it frees your mind. On the other hand, it kind of introduces legitimate political protest, which is what was the anti-war movement before acid and the psychedelic stuff happened was doing. It brings that into contact with criminality, and it fucks everyone's head up in the best possible way. You're less good at organising a rally or a riot or a sit-in if you're tripping, right? So it's very easy to have kind of warm feels about how awesome and how liberating the acid experience was in the 60s. Plenty of people will say plenty of people will say that the Vietnam War, for instance, went on 3 or 4 years longer than it needed to, because the momentum that the anti-war movement had suddenly was diverted into sort of psychedelic hedonism, basically. So that's something this kind of drugs thing is a delicate dialectical process where there's lots of ups and downs and ifs and what have yous, and very difficult to kind of, it's just a thing. It's good and bad, right? But it definitely was bad. No one quite knows what the government, the man, the CIA or the MK Ultras, whoever, no one quite knows what they were up to with LSD. It seems like they were pretty keen for it to make everybody go woo and stop organising rallies and stuff. But also, it's hard not to take the positive side of it as well. It's hard not to think that this drug that they tested as a mind control agent and freaked out a lot of people with in these kind of like sterile environments, among whom were Leary and Kesey, kind of going, oh, I can see the universe and I'm a bit scared. It's easy to imagine that they would have gone, let's give this to the freaks and shut them the hell up and drive them crazy, without kind of having anticipated that if you are hanging out with your mates in a field, listening to cool music, taking acid can be really nice and fun and actually commit you to a non-conformist headspace better than they had anticipated. It's really tricky and interesting to think about. Like, is acid good? Was it deployed within wider populations for good reasons or for bad ones? For good effects or for bad ones? No one really knows, to be honest, or at least that, not publicly. It's lovely to think that the CIA might have thought we've got an ultimate weapon for making everybody conform, and actually they didn't. But we'll get to this. We'll get to this at the end. There's an interesting letter about that. Interesting. There's a letter about this later. Anyway, this is ᴥThe Cassady. This issue 8 of the Invisibles, cover date April 95. As we'll find out, skipping ahead a bit, I know this is a bit off-piece, I'm terribly sorry, but this is the month that Preacher #1 dropped. Now, like the secondary character, if you like, in Preacher is obviously Cassady, is, Jesse's buddy, the vampire, Cassady. So we've had Preacher, vampire, Cassady, yeah? I'm saying that this guy in the mask is the ghost of ᴥThe Cassady, and that's where we're going with page 1 and who this guy is. And there are reasons I think it could be your man Cassady, and why it kind of thematically maybe it should be. I don't think it's too much of a big deal, but it did really stick out to me. I was like, why has this guy got a mask on? Who is he? And then I think I worked it out. I hope I've convinced you. And then we go over the page and we're onto our splash page. Arcadia, Part 4 head, let's do our credits. It's traditional. Grant Morrison, writer. Jill Thompson, pencils. Dennis Kramer on inks. Daniel Vozzo on colours. Clem Robbins on letters. Julie Rottenberg, assistant editor. Stuart Moore, editor. The Invisibles created by Grant Morrison. So yeah, he gets put. So Cassady here, as we're going to call him, he's not in here again. It's not a big deal. Gets kind of called to heel by his mistress here, and okay, let's reflect on his question. Who's driving this fucker, right? And when we're on page 1 of the comic. When in the first panel, when somebody says that, who's driving this fucker? Where is this comic coming from? That's the other question that we've got. And kind of like the key line on our splash page over the page is, in future, it'll do as it's told. Now, we're in its future. We're in its future now. Just to reflect on some of the grim stuff that I was talking about last time, some of the stuff about technologies of control and where they might have emerged from. Let's reflect that we're suddenly right in the middle of San Francisco. This is where Silicon Valley ideology, tech utopianism, technological control, digital culture, as it was being written about by people like Douglas Rushkoff at the time. His book Siberia was in the reading list last week too, remember. All of that has come in via the city of San Francisco, which kind of used its like kind of traditional acceptance of immigrant communities and queer communities, especially to kind of like, hey, we're the nice city, we can have a really good time here, let's hang out. When that became the overculture and impacted with digital capital, the kind of the nice groovy city of San Francisco became gentrified and turned into like the citadel of global norming, right? That's where we're going. In the future, it'll do as it's told. On to page 3. Oh yeah, so we've got King Mob and the Marquis de Sade are at this fetish club. They're watching all this go on. They're listening to this speed rap from this guy, and the Marquis de Sade realizes that like there's an entire culture built around his writings, and he kind of, as much as he sort of claims to want to be to have been erased by history, he's kind of excited about the fact that his work has turned into this kind of like thriving culture of looking at things. It's really important that it comes into the Silicon Valley tech piece now, because it shows that tech has this understanding of S&M, right? Of pain and pleasure being these kind of like very fundamental modes which set the boundaries of set the foundations for psychology, set the foundations for sciences like behaviorism, set like human cybernetics as a possibility, because you understand that there are these pushes and pulls of pain and pleasure which could be monkeyed with at will, almost. So this is like technology understanding that it can kind of interface with the softness of human desire, which is kind of one of the territories that it didn't have before. The terrible thing that the Invisibles are doing in this issue is bringing Pseudo-vision into the brave new world that has such people in it as the Marquis Tempest quotes himself, in it like cybernetics as a human affective control mechanism. That's what this is about. They're still doing their kind of philosophy bit, him and the king. People are afraid to grow up and take responsibility for their lives. King Mob says about the guy who they were just talking to, I think he felt let down by his driving instructors. He thought he just had to sit back in his seat and be taken everywhere. He didn't realise they, Kesey and Leary, were just showing him what to do. They're talking about the revolution. Really? Like, what does that mean? So Leary and Kesey was showing him what he had to do. All they did was tell people to take acid and the rest would happen. And he thought he had just to sit back in his seat and be taken everywhere. He didn't realise they were just showing him what to do, which is what? Like, just do your own thing? This guy's already in a fetish mask in a nightclub. Like, he's kind of doing his own thing. We haven't kind of woken up in a world of rainbows and flowers, and we haven't all kind of evolved into super people. I don't really get what the king's dismissal of this guy's objection is here. It's not terribly helpful, I don't think. So what? Yeah. So were you just supposed to be the kind of guy who gets in a bus and spreads joy and drugs and stuff, or were you kind of supposed to kind of go and hang out with hang out with the Beatles, hang out with the Black Panthers, sell them all out to the CIA, be just a CIA asset like Leary was, Yeah, I mean, Kesey's definitely got plausible deniability for how much of a I'm doing this for the baddies he might have been. Leary, much less. Like Leary, knew kind of what a ambivalent game he was playing, whereas Kesey kind of seemed to at least believe in his own hedonism enough to think that he was just doing the right thing by doing the right thing. And I don't get what the guy was meant to have done. I don't get what the King Mob's criticism of what this guy's query is. I think he's, I don't know, sort of being invisible, kind of go buck wild with guns. I don't know. We'll get to it. I have become immortal, says de Sade, and he has. Okay, over the page, onto page 4, and we're in ᴥThe with Ragged Robin. Remember, she had just been shown as our last month's cliffhanger. The head of John the Baptist, the ancient Templar Treasure. These cipher men had found it in the church of ᴥThe. What have I written about this one? Well, my notes say what do we think the Templar Treasure was? Okay, so remember how we had a bit last time about castles on top of hills, the Qatar treasure being kind of spirited away. The same thing sort of happening to the Templars, that they were sort of suppressed by King Philip of France and the Pope, who he had kind of like cajoled into it, and yet they kind of escaped with whatever their Templar thing was, the thing that they were supposed to have found in Jerusalem when they when they liberated it, when they occupied it after the First Crusade. Yeah, like they found something. Okay, that's the legend. They found something. It's kind of similar by analogy to the something that the baddies in the castle of Silling were exploring, like that kind of that defiance of nature that the banker wanted to do. It's similar to the whatever it is that the kind of the brave Qatar spirited away the night before they were all massacred. We know from like accounts of like Templar tortures and that they maybe worshipped a head which they thought was the head of John the Baptist. That's maybe a real thing, or heads which represented the head of John the Baptist. Now, if they had gone to like an old church in Jerusalem and found a head, and some like vicar there had gone, yeah, that's John the Baptist's head. Like, yeah, of course they'd have nicked it and started worshipping it. Like, that's not even very weird for the time. To like relic worship is just a thing that Christianity has had in it, and still has, obviously. So I don't think that could be that worshipping a head rather than the cross would be the thing. Obviously, desecrating the cross, having queer relationships, worshipping Baphomet, which maybe is like a mistranslation of Muhammad. Yeah, some of the Templars were well, like Islamicized Christians. Yeah, definitely. Some of them were probably into devil worship. There was a few thousand of them knocking around, and they were all pretty, they were all celibate monk, supposedly. They were definitely involved in life ways that were separate from church and state in a way that nobody else kind of within Europe at the time was. They had their own rules. They had their own corporate rules, as we would see them now. They were loyal to the Templar Order first and foremost, in the same way that like a San Francisco-based Google exec is, or Amazon exec, or Uber exec is loyal to them first, right? And in so doing, they have certain liberties that normal people don't have. So the fact that the Templars were worshipping a head, isn't that weird? The fact that they've like stuck some steampunk cogs on it and they've got a key and can wind it up and make it talk, that's quite weird. But the Templar Treasure is much more likely to be probably just like a bit of maths, a bit of algebra that they found in ᴥThe, as they used to call the Holy Land. It's probably just a bit of maths, a bit of algebra, maybe some codexes that they were using. Oh, missed it. There's a fly, right? There's a fly in the room. So annoying. Sorry. So yeah, if you hear any clapping sounds, that's me trying to get the fly. The Templar Treasure, the Templar mission appears to have been the thing that they knew and did that nobody else liked, and was kind of way ahead of the game, was the abstraction of money. Basically, they had worked out that they'd invented checks and banking, right? They'd said, okay, so if you give me some gold, we're going to give you a bit of paper in return for it. You take it to anywhere in Europe, pretty much. Take it to another one of our Templar houses or manors or whatever, one of our keeps. Take it, you get your gold back. So which is great. It means you can transfer stuff around Europe without getting mugged, right? You haven't got anything of actual like value on you. So suddenly wealth, which is very much tied to like very difficult to get hold of assets like gold, or land itself, which is defended by kings and castles. That was the basis of wealth in these kind of like feudal times. The Templars were going, hang on a minute, we've worked out that you can abstract this wealth, turn it into a bit of paper, some writing on a bit of paper, some language, and that does the job just as well. Now that's like the development of like abstract capital. I know I keep saying abstract, but I'm going to, sorry. What I mean by that is like physical stuff being turned into a non-physical stuff which represents it, and in terms of like material dynamics, they're exactly the same. Yeah. What that kind of means is they were like way ahead of the game, the Templars, in understanding that that they could develop forms of wealth that weren't tied to gold or land. They could suddenly start to, it was like Christian usury. Yeah. Suddenly they were able to kind of turn material goods into language and profit from it. The King of France, A, he owed them a ton of money, and B, they were undermining the thing by which he made money, which was like the ownership of land. He was like, not having this, shut them down, got the Pope involved, and the Pope probably worked out, he was probably like, hang on a minute, I'm not too keen on this wealth thing either. I don't think it was necessarily about any kind of particular moral injunction that they had around usury, you know, the charging of high interest rates, which is, you know, which is banned in the Bible, basically, right? Although my understanding of it is, I'm really like, again, as soon as you start to talk about this stuff, you start to fall into the language of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which, please let me reiterate, I'm not interested in doing. But like, it says in the Bible, right? Or not the Bible, like the kind of the Torah, or whatever, the Old Testament. You're not allowed to lend money at interest to your brothers. That means that to people in the Jewish community that you're not allowed to charge high interest to fellow Jews, because obviously it makes things awkward around the dinner table. You know, when you apply that rule to Christianity, it gets really weird, because it's like, oh, hang on, potentially anyone's a Christian, because all you've got to do is go, yeah, okay, cool, I'll be a Christian, and therefore the charging interest on loans of money isn't possible. Didn't stop them from doing it, but it meant they had to be cagey about doing it and and find excuses and you know, you know all this stuff. But the Templars had found a get out clause around that, and that set of intellectual relations that they'd worked on, that was the Templar Treasure, right? The idea that it was the head of John the Baptist, or that the head of John the Baptist had magical powers. Not be funny, if you had the head of John the Baptist, it would be a pretty far out thing. It would lend a certain colour to the room. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it wasn't that. It was about money, wealth, and power being abstractable via language. This is where some of this stuff comes in. Great little page with Robin kind of being spooked by these cyphermen going, oh, and they're sort of worshipping this dumb-looking head. It's got really funny googly eyes, and it starts singing Dead or Alive, Spin Me Round. One of the best disco, just one of the best songs of all time, one of the best pop songs of all time. Pete Burns is a total legend, R.I.P., like deeply missed, but you spin me right round, baby. It's just an amazing tune. Stock Aitken and Waterman's kind of like a banging high energy disco classic. And then he's kind of saying, I don't know, some of these sort of, the rest of the stuff that the head is saying after they've kind of cranked it up with their magic key is so sort of, it's just difficult to Google, right? Because some of it's kind of like, it's just broad and vague. He mentions the eschaton. He mentions the spinning of a record player at 33, 45 and 78 revolutions per minute. There's a quote from Andrew Marvell's to his coy mistress, this thing about time getting faster and the winged chariot drawing near. Andrew Marvell was probably like, in terms of the way that we're, the forms that we're used to, he's basically like a proto-Byron, really. The kind of the cooler one was his mate John Donne. The poem that's quoted here, it's nice, like, don't get me wrong, nicely written, clever stuff. Very uncool poem. He's just badgering his coy mistress into sleeping with him, and she blatantly doesn't want to, and it's a bit like, mate, leave it alone. Andrew Marvell, quite a creepy guy. No more future, no more past, no more present. There's loads of kind of gibberish, which is elusive, and it's nicely written, and it comes across really well. And Robin's just got this brilliant look of like skepticism on her head, on her face, all the way through it. While the head of John the Baptist, this kind of what does he call it? He's the head of Revelation, the prophet of the coming apocalypse. the Templar Oracle. It belongs to us. It's all very high drama, and she's like, yeah, really? This looks kind of stupid. And that skepticism is kind of, that's like her magical power, remember? Is that she is a bit like, taking a step back from this. The fact that this is all happening from Robin is kind of important. They pull out their kind of creepy David Cronenberg style gynecological instruments, and the head has ordered them to kill Robin. Basically, it has demanded a sacrificial tribute. This is great. It's really good Doctor Who stuff. You shouldn't have come here invisible. You won't be killed, just changed. Creepy villains, gas mask, leather trench coats, skeptical hippie women. It's a good little scene. On to page 6. We're back in San Francisco, and in fact they've taken what is quite a long walk from where they probably were, but they are psychic projections come ghosts, so maybe they can just move nice and quickly between pals. I think we're definitely supposed to think that's what's happening. Actually, they are on the Golden Gate Bridge, and King Bob says, I've been desperate to do this ever since I saw the Subterraneans. So this is why I mentioned Neil Cassady earlier as well. Subterraneans is Kerouac's second novel, was made into a film. He's talking about the film version of it, obviously. Neil Cassady is significant in the Subterraneans by his invisibility. He's not in it. Kerouac's first novel is all about the crazy adventures of Neil Cassady, or Dean Moriarty as he names him. And then for his second novel, even though the scene is almost identical, Cassady's not in it. He's been omitted. Basically, him and Kerouac were having a lover's tiff at the time, pretty much. The tiff is kind of born out of the fact that Kerouac was in a straight relationship at the time, and that kind of romance is the basis of what the Subterraneans is about, the book and the film. He's talking about the film version here, because he saw it, yeah. Oh my god, there's so much to say about this, and I don't really know how much of it's relevant. So Cassady's not in it. He's like this kind of big absence. He's like this natural road thing. The counterculture, not necessarily in the 90s, but the way that it emerges from the 90s into what we as humans in the 21st century know that San Franciscan Siberian, with the CY, not like Siberia, CY Iberia. We know what that ethos is now, is almost like the counterculture minus Cassady, right? What if you didn't have this kind of like big beating heart in it? What if that was removed? What if also you recognised, as Garth Ennis does by making Cassady a vampire in, it's not the same guy obviously, but he makes Cassady a vampire in Preacher. Like, what if the reality of what it was to have a heart like Neil Cassady was parasitical? What if it was vampiric? What if the damage that it did behind itself was worse than the gift of fast living and kind of like freedom? Let's be honest, that's what we're talking about. That it communicated. What if one of those things like vastly outweighed the other? Neil Cassady himself wasn't unaware of this contradiction in his life, that like by living forwards and by going further and by kind of volunteering to drive the bus towards the crash barrier of the 21st century, he knew that he was aware that his kids were messed up, for instance, and that troubled him as well it should. He knew that like there was a lot of pain and stress in his life because being a hedonist kind of is painful and stressful. Like, the party, there's a reason parties don't last all the time, right? Isn't there? And it's not just because, you got to eat. It's because life has got to be something other than that too. Otherwise, where's the celebration? And that contradiction is kind of acute. And it Cassady's life and lifiness came at the expense of a lot of other people who were being fed off by his, bonhomie, if you like. Yeah. Anyway, as King Bob says, he's talking about the Subterraneans, the 1960 film. It's directed by, I can't remember, no one really. Starring George Peppard and Roddy McDowall on the man's side. Leslie Caron, or Caron, I think it might be, is the female lead. It's a really interesting performance from a woman called Janice Rule as the character Roxanne, who is, I'm going to forget her name, brilliant, who is playing a character based on an artist that the Beats used to hang out with, who who jumped off a building or fell. I don't know. Kind of probably committed suicide in 1961, shortly after the Subterraneans came out. This character Babylon, that's played by this character Roxanne. Spoilers. This character Roxanne that Janice Rule is playing. Oh, why can't I remember the name? That's Iris Bowyer or something. Yeah, Iris Bowyer. Sad thing. She was an artist who was collected by her beat buddies, like William Burroughs, who was like the clever beat. He rated her art really highly, and very little of it is left because she was poor and just drew on cheap paper, and now all of her paintings have faded and have kind of gone almost. But she died in 1961, only a year after the Subterraneans, a film based in part on her life, was released. Vampires. But also, like, it's interesting because the look that she has, Janice Rule is beautiful, but the look that she gives the character of Roxanne is maybe the first appearance on screen of the Babylon type, basically, that kind of like Marjorie Cameron 60s look. So we're talking like red wild hair, kind of huge, like kind of pixie pointy eyebrows, kind of slightly demonic looking kind of vibe. It's definitely like a kind of a type of character that would emerge into this, that was key to what the beats were about, in a way, that Jack Parsons vibe. We'll get to this another time. But yeah, there was like a type in the 60s beat cinemas, and it was the Babylon woman. And I think the Subterraneans has maybe got the first instance of it in Janice Rule's character Roxanne. Keep an eye out for it. King Bob's right. It is quite a depressing film. The sexual politics of it is terrible. Not as bad as the racial politics in the book. I guess you could even defend that in a bit. Basically, Kerouac is going out with a black woman. In the film, she's turned into a white woman, and her trauma, rather than being kind of like intergenerational race trauma that Madhu, the character Madhu, is suffering from, as she was in real life, from the fact that she was living in an incredibly racist society, and even this white guy, novelist guy, was like, "Oh, I'm so into the fact that you're black, and isn't it amazing that we're mixing," and all this kind of stuff. Just a total douchebag was Jack Kerouac. All of that kind of intergenerational race trauma. In the film, Madhu is French, and she has seen her, I think she was French in real life as well, or French-ish, and in real life, during the war, she watched her mother be killed in occupied France, by the Germans. And that's the trauma that she's carrying around, which is making her so she's pretty messed up, bless her, in the book and the film. So forget, like, the racism bit in the Subterraneans book is really dodgy, and it is, even when I read it 20 years ago, it was very like, this isn't the right way to be talking about race. I'm sorry, mate. But that's not in the film. What it's replaced with is this kind of weird, like, Euro trauma. Basically, is this weird, like, the perils of being French in an American world, right? If you kind of reflect on some of the stuff we've been saying in recent episodes about Orlando and the way that, like, the European state, particularly the French state, was sustained by the kind of violence that Orlando represents. That becomes relevant to what we're talking about here, I think. It's a pretty depressing film, but the party scenes are good. The party scenes aren't that good. Do you know what I mean? It's no Valley of the Dolls. They're not. The party scenes aren't that good. But yeah, it's watchable. George Peppard's character is okay. It does make you go, Kerouac was a dick, which he was. There's a couple of good, like, the female leads carry the film, basically. Leslie Caron as the aforementioned Madhu, and Janice Rule, I'm going to mention her again. She just does this amazing bit where she is introduced in the film as, like, I am Medusa. I am the queen of the apocalypse. Like, the Babylon thing isn't, like, played low. It's quite up in the mix. She's talking about how she wears coal makeup because the ancient Egyptians did it, and it stopped the demons from getting in through their eyes. Which made me think about how difficult it would be to live in ancient Egypt without sunglasses. It's like, oh my goodness, yeah, your eyes would really hurt, wouldn't they? And there's an incredible bit where she just kind of like does her eye makeup, and she just sort of does it straight away, freehand, perfectly first time, and she just kind of does it on camera, and you're like, oh, that's good. It's really like, wow, I reckon putting on makeup is harder than that. Then King Rob is talking about Beat Girl as like the Beat movies. He says the British Beat films are more fun. Beat Girl, it's a classic. John Barry soundtrack. The Glory of Gillian Hill is brilliant. The Subterraneans has got a really good soundtrack. That's the other best bit of it. The female, the female leads and the Andre Previn soundtrack are the best bits of it. Beat Girl is a much kind of less serious film in many ways. Although it is about sex clubs. It's not a completely irrelevant, just like sideways like pop cult ref that King Bob was doing here. It does tie into some of the themes that this issue's about, and it is more fun than the Subterraneans. Adam Faith's performances are like, I just want to play, is priceless. But yeah, okay, you got to talk about something else in this page here though, right? Because this is where we are. In the Subterraneans movie, there's a balloon, and it's a balloon that Leo buys Mardu. And it represents her hope and wish for freedom, and the kind of the happy life away from her, her mental problems that she can have. It's a balloon. There's a bit where they don't stand on the Golden Gate Bridge and let it go, but from their flat they can see some balloons being let go. Not her balloon. She's still holding on to that tightly. It gets a face drawn on it. It becomes this proper little sort of like spirit-like avatar of her higher hopes for herself. But they do see a bunch of balloons being let free, and she overjoys at this because she's got this weird kind of like desperation for freedom, and she wants the balloons to be happy. And you have the Golden Gate Bridge in the background from where they're viewing it. So the balloons aren't released from the bridge. It's just the bridge is in shot. And it's really like, okay, so basically what we got here, I think, is a mistake. It's either a mistake or quite a subtle joke. So there is a balloon on this page, but it just kind of appears down here on panel 5. If you look very carefully at panel 2, you can just about make out that King Mob is holding a line, which it could very well be a string, and it leads straight up into the Marquis de Sade's speech balloon here, where he says, excuse me. Now, it's actually kind of funny, but I think it is just a mistake, and it's funny in the way that only a mistake can be, is that, like, I'm pretty sure the script must have said balloon here, and the letterer, who is, I don't want to get his name wrong, Clem Robbins. I nearly said Clem Robbins without looking at it. I should know by now. The letterer, Clem Robbins, kind of went, okay, that's where the speech balloon goes, or something. Basically, there's in the script it says draw a balloon, and between Jill Thompson and Clem Robbins, they've got a bit mixed up about whose balloon it is. So King Rob looks like he's holding on to the Marquis's speech. Which, if we kind of maybe in a few pages' time, we're going to be talking about how words and language might be objects. So actually, that's not that off theme for the issue either. But I do think it is a funny mistake, and it definitely feels like it because the page doesn't really flow quite well, because you just see the string disappearing here, and then we've got this balloon, and really the balloon did need to be set up on panel 2 for it to make sense, but it does, but it isn't. It's just a line which could almost not be there, and he's holding on to the Marcus's speech balloon. I find that kind of thing amusing. And he lets the balloon go, and they're having more of their philosophy chat here. I think it's quite an important one. We're in the final furlong. This is King Mob. We're in the final furlong in the race between a never-ending global party and a world that looks like Auschwitz. Now, this is like what the invisible versus the baddies battle is going to be, right? A never-ending global party sounds good, and a world that looks like Auschwitz sounds bad. And the Marquis's response to this is, so it's more feeble-minded utopianism. I thought you were more intelligent than that. I have no wish to live in anyone's perfect world but my own. King Mob replies, exactly. That's why we're trying to pull off a trick. It says track, but he means trick, that will result in everyone getting exactly the kind of world they want, everyone including the enemy. So, like, that's an ambition, right? They want utopia for everyone. That doesn't sound kind of like possible in, like, the fourfold material world, does it? No, it doesn't. And he lets the balloon go. The balloon, again, you know, balloons are symbols of freedom and hope and optimism and childish joy, right? And letting them go is part of the fun of it, and it carries an enormous sadness, as any child can tell you. But also, it's what a balloon wants, isn't it? Is to be set free and to kind of just see how high it can get before it bursts. That's the wish of every balloon, and kind of the wish of everyone, really, is to have freedom, isn't it? Is it? You know, is it? That's one of the questions we're going to. Definitely looks like a sperm. Definitely looks like a little allusion to, you know, panspermia, to a little sperm guy traveling through space. There's going to be stuff about, you know, placentas and birthing stuff in later issues. We've had stuff in previous issues about panspermia and fungal planet colonizations. Yeah. This balloon is perhaps doing quite a lot of work. Yeah, a couple of times. In this panel as well, in panel 4, the balloon is occluded by a balloon, a speech balloon. I think there's maybe a little bit of crossed wires going on in this, on this page particularly. Not that it doesn't, you know. If anything, it makes it better. Oh right, okay, and then over the page, we've got a cool advert. We've got a cool advert for the British invasion. It's the second British invasion. It's April 1995, and the British are coming again. It's a brilliant advert for Sam Goody music stores. You know, we've seen these adverts pop up in a few episodes before, haven't we? But this time, it's not like they're not touting Stone Roses and Rancid. They're touting Oasis and Portishead. The British sound... Sorry, I won't do an American accent, that's rude. The British sound is once again reaching across the ocean. These two bands are evidence of the superb music that abounds in England. We have both titles on sale now. The British are coming. It's Oasis's album, Definitely Maybe, and Portishead's album, Dummy. What can we say about those? I think that most of Oasis's best work is on that first album. I think there was something quite interesting musically happening there. Basically taking that kind of indie layered guitar vibe and kind of hooking it into, you know, classic pop melodicism. I think that is quite good with like punky attitude. I think that's worth having. Very easy to just kind of look at Oasis and go, oh my goodness, that band was terrible. But there is some genuinely interesting production and songwriting on that first album. I like Liam Gallagher's voice too. I had that album. I love that album. I had that album and played it a lot. I liked Oasis a lot for that first album. I'd got beyond them by the second album because then other people were into them and I'm too cool for that shit. The other album here, A Dummy by Portishead. Goodness, we were proud locally of that album's still pretty good. That trip hop moment is still quite important because it's... what do I want to say here? Basically, it was the first time that British culture had metabolized hip hop and turned it into a sound that was unique. Basically, it wasn't hip hop and British hip hop. There had been 20 years of British hip hop, but it hadn't really ever broken out of the shadow of American hip hop until the early 21st century with grime, basically. But in the meantime, we had trip hop, and that is its own sound. It was developed here in the UK, in Bristol, let's be honest, by three bands: Portishead, Massive Attack, and Tricky. Oh dear, it does take you back. I had this album too, and I don't know if you remember, oldsters. There's no young people watching. I don't know if you remember, but Dummy, this Portishead album, was so popular that it sort of sold out. And there was a period of about 4 or 5 months where none of the record shops in the country had any copies of it left, and it was like a small record label that hadn't worked out how popular this record was going to get. There was this terrible like bottleneck in the supply chain, and for ages you couldn't get this album in the shops, and you had people going, passing around tapes of it or whatever. I had it. I was the only person out of anyone I knew who had it for ages. Because that's how much of a prick I was when I was little, and now. And then by the time it kind of went on sale again and everybody started buying it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not really into that anymore. You can imagine how annoying I was, can't you? That trip-hop sound is, I don't think is terribly relevant to what we're doing here, other than the kind of the King Mob's kind of like Britpop abroad vibe that he's got going on here. What are they so upset about? Portishead, why are they so whingy? I've been reflecting on this month. I wonder, can I say it before I run out of space on the memory stick and I have to stop? Bristol is a slave city. The sad thing they're singing about is slave trauma. The same thing that damaged Mardu in the Subterraneans, the original Mardu in the book. The trauma of slavery basically is why Portishead are so upset and are having to pantomime misery all the time underneath their kind of tasteful, dusty beats. So that's the answer to trip hop. That's not to be dismissive of the slave trade, I hope. It's just that obviously those intergenerational traumas and that psychological damage is a very real thing. I don't think it comes up very much that Bristol, where trip hop comes from, is a city built on the slave trade and built on the bones of black people, basically, and that miserabilism that kind of stretches throughout that heart of trip hop, of that Bristol sound, comes from that. As far as I'm able to see, it's like, what else is it about? It comes from that, and it's funny how it kind of just got translated into a kind of a sort of a generalized pop culture miserableness. But yeah, Portishead and Oasis, two very different sounds that were coming out of England at the time. I wish that a Scottish or Welsh band was in there and that they'd got it wrong and just said England. That would have been brilliant, but it didn't happen. Over the page, we are on to pages. We're back in the windmill. We're on pages 7 and 8. We're back in the windmill, remember? Dane had found King Mob's gun. Orlando was closing in for the kill. He'd already cut his finger off, bless him. Gets a bit confusing here, to be honest. He's like, bang, Dane fires, but he misses because he's never fired a gun before. And Orlando is kind of taunting him. Try the safety catch. It's not as easy as it looks on television, is it? Guns are so much heavier than they look. But Jack kind of does like steady himself, and he says, "Get the fuck!" And he actually kind of pulls a pretty cool face here, and boom, he does get one straight into Orlando's heart by the looks of things. And Orlando's like, "Oh, you're getting better. I felt that one." But then, you remember how Fanny got cut real bad with his knife a minute in the previous episode? She's back on her feet. Orlando. And he goes, "What? You're bleeding to death. You must be. I slashed open your chest." But he only got her across her boobs, and her boobs are made of latex and silicone. And they cost her a fortune in the transformation store in London, and he's just ruined them. And he's very confused by this. He's never met a trans woman before, old Orlando, which is weird, right? Like, there's a whole book about how Orlando changed gender a lot. I haven't quite got that yet. What I do kind of feel is emerging here is that, like, this scene in the windmill is turning into an exorcism, basically. The Invisibles have this kind of knack, part like their superpower is being able to kind of find the magic in a bad situation. And they've used, they've got iron into the demon. They've sacrificed a bit of their own bodily tissue, just because it's not made of flesh in this case. It's still definitely her. I'm not half the woman I used to be, thanks to you, and you're in trouble. They're putting together, by doing these things, all of the magical ingredients you need to get rid of an aggressive demon in your midst. And the tables are being turned on Orlando slowly. Over the page, we've got another advert. Mom said there'd be days like this. It's an advert for the adaptation of the Tank Girl movie. Do you remember that? Bloody hell, they made a lot of money out of that. It took them years to spend it. John Bolton and Peter Milligan. I have not even seen the Tank Girl movie because, you know, I heard that it was rubbish. I'm pretty sure every time it was on when back then I was too drunk or whatever to care. I haven't read this either. Oh, sorry, it's not by John Bolton and Peter Milligan. It's by Peter Milligan and Andy Pritchett. Just the cover is by John Bolton. This is a great painted ad here. That's the cover, I presume. It looks great. Plowing across the desert to battle injustice, save the world, and have a laugh. Tank Girl. I haven't really worked out how this fits into, other than that this is like. So if we're talking, so you know, I've spoken at length before about how there's a nice British feel to The Invisibles, even though it's obviously an American comic, and it's being sort of like really like woohoo and advertised and pantomimed and sold back to you here. This thing here, this kind of crust punk thing that Tank Girl represents, was like the flip side of that. This is like this is where my sympathies lie, to be honest, because I lived here and I was rebelling a bit against that, and I ended up kind of doing counter rebellion by doing the most normsky, the most normie thing possible, which was getting into trip hop and Britpop. But this was like the other side of it. This is kind of the King Mobs vibe, right? As much as he talks like a member of Blur, he actually looks like a kind of a cross punk guy, like Tank Girl. So there's that's the opposing strand of what was going on in Britain at the time. And this bit gets written out of history quite a lot, the Tank Girl side of it. But actually, it was huge and more organic and authentic, arguably, and had comic book adaptations, you know, which Oasis never had. I have not read the prestige one-shot movie adaptation of the universally derided movie of Tank Girl, but it's written by Peter Milligan. I'd give it a try. If you've got it, send it to me. On to page 9. They're still at this rave. They've gone into the rave room at the Fetish Club, and King Mob and Boy are talking about smart drinks. Smart drinks. What is it about smart drinks? Have you ever tried smart drinks? I think this is just a bit of like gap year travel logging, I think. Last time I was in San Francisco, this is King Mob. It was weird. I remembered all my multiplication tables from school were perfect. Smart drinks. I had smart drinks is what people had before you had smoothies. Basically, it was basically like orange juice with like some horrible medicine powder dumped in it. And whenever I had one, I was always like, "That's horrible." And then people kind of got into smoothies, and which are nicer. You know, to be honest, they are nicer. What are we going to do until the world ends? We're going to dance ourselves dizzy. Come on. Wah! And their ghost forms do some dancing. They have a nice little rave up. That's fine. On to page 10. We're back in Rennes-le-Château, and the head of John the Baptist is kind of doing his thing, quoting Fanny now, kind of almost as if he's pulling the words that he's saying from Robin's head. Robin is still sort of chatting with the Cyphermen. The Cyphermen are kind of being all threatening, but she's doing a very good job of not being fussed about it, obviously because she is, just, as she says, she's just a psychic projection. They can't really hurt her. The head of John the Baptist is on this kind of like flat pyramid, ziggurat-y step-looking thing. I think we're obviously meant to be thinking of the Eye of Horus, stroke, you know, the eye in the triangle thing that's on the dollar bill, you know, favoured of, conspiracy world. Maybe the head of John the Baptist is the hidden eye. That's why we've got such a weird googly eye here. And that's why there's an eye on top of the pyramid on the United States $1 bill. Maybe, right? Maybe that's the worship of John the Baptist is the secret of the Templars and the Masons and all those guys who, built America in their own illuminated image. As we go on, so she's basically using her kind of like skepticism magic to to work out what's going on with the head of John the Baptist and kind of to undo it, to kind of disenchant it, if you like. One of the things that the head is saying, it says "no more firmament." That's a quote. There's no more firmament, no more core and mantle, no more sea. That's a quote from 1920 play, There Is No More Firmament, it's called, by Antonin Artaud, getting a bit of French again. That's a very Invisibles-y in very invisible-y kind of text. It's like a part of the theatre of cruelty. That was kind of Anton Artaud's kind of dramaturgical theory. It's all about, it's about kind of like Dadaist theatre a bit, basically, using, confrontational, shocking, noisy techniques to, remind the participants in the audience and in the performance themselves what they're doing there. How to to be aware of their own co-creation of the piece, basically, and to be aware of like what theatre can do as a ritual form of group psychodrama, if you like. It involves a guy standing going, it's about like Sirius crashing into the planet and the scientists and the kind of the just the panic and the way that that's reported in the media via like radio reports and stuff. It does involve a crowd of people chanting "King Mob, King Mob, King Mob" at one point. So the connection to the Invisibles is really clear, as well as the Sirius stuff. I don't think we'll sidetrack into the whole Sirius thing, but that's a really important part of like Illuminatus-y mythology too. But I wonder even if Orson Welles would have seen There Is No More Firmament, because there's a sense of like apocalypse mediated through apocalypse mediated through mass media, that is reminiscent of the War of the Worlds. So even though it predates it by 18 years nearly, I guess it's not impossible that he could have been influenced by it. Anyway, and then kind of Robin gives with it. Yeah, she sort of says that you only hear, like, the head is a meaningless object, basically. It just spouts, it just speaks in tongues, talks glossolalia, and you hear whatever you want to hear. So it does perform like an oracular function, but that function is, basically coming out of the listener. Now, to me, that doesn't make it useless. That makes it fairly useful if it's like a dream machine which can kind of like pull an oracle out of you. That may or may not work, but let's say sometimes it does. Then that might be quite useful. She kind of, if you remember back what we were saying about Les Bergères d'Arcadie, I really can't say that. I can't do the d'Arcadie. Can't do that bit very well. So Poussin's painting, how he was basically like painting the primal scene of like artistic creation, where the shepherds, kind of like the simple rustic people, become civilized by one, recognizing their own shadow as like a kind of a pictorial representation of themselves, and two, as their shadow, their psychological shadow, which kind of creates both like the technique and the purpose for art, right? It gives them a way to go, oh, right, we can draw pictures, that's cool, but also we've got something to draw pictures about, which is, the nature of the human psyche and what it is to be a conscious and indeed unconscious meat puppet. So she kind of debunks that really quickly with this with this excellent kind of saying, she just kind of like gives you a very she actually gives like a very sort of Oasis, it's all a load of bollocks kind of reading of it, to go back to some terminology we were using a few issues ago. She's basically going, come on, mate, this ain't it. And the truth of that is so shocking, and the frustration, even though the Cyphermen start attacking her, she is just a psychic projection, her tools aren't hurting them, which does kind of imply that she says my body's thousands of miles away. It's not thousands of miles away. Her body's outside of London somewhere, and she's in France. It's only a few hundred miles at the most. But yeah, they're attacking her even though she's a psychic projection. But it does kind of mean that at some true point, at some real point, the Cyphermen are really in, as physical beings, they are in the church at Rennes-le-Château and have found the head of John the Baptist. She says the Invisibles don't need it. Tell your masters you've discovered the secret treasure of the Templars. Tell them it doesn't matter. The Invisibles don't need it. The head's all yours. You poor bastards can't hear anything but instructions and commands. That's we're all hearing different things. We're hearing what we want to hear. There's a bit like when we get to the other guy in a bit, we'll kind of touch on that. I really like this scene though. I just think there's something really nicely punchy about this spread. the drama of it and the way she does just lay it down in like a really clear, cutting through the nonsense kind of way, I think is really effective. Yeah, and her point is, et in Arcadia ego, et in Arcadia, so and in Arcadia I am, as if that I thing is still the thing that's kind of radiating meaning into the land of Arcadia, i.e. paradise, but also in this context into the land of death. It's a bit like kind of what, so yeah, life after death in one hand, but also kind of like an atheism, kind of like an empty universe kind of thing. A pointless universe kind of thing, even. Yeah, sort of a pessimism. What's really cool about this, though, so they start attacking her and they can't. And for whatever reason, whether it's because their frustration at not being able to stab her with their like David Cronenberg toys, whether it's at that or they just can't stand, like the true facts that she's laying down. They just can't cope with this like sick knowledge, and they start properly freaking out. They're properly like grabbing their heads and like going no, as if they're being hit by some kind of invisible magical power beams, which are really screwing with them. It's really Doctor Who, it's more Blake 7, right? Where somebody just like a group of people are either goodies or baddies. They're defeated by somebody going woo with a synthesizer, and the sound is so like that it kind of everybody freaks out and it knocks them over. That's what's happening to the Cyphermen just because of her sick knowledge. Yeah, there's more to say about Ren the Chateau and stuff, but I think we're going to do it in a couple of pages' time. I think we're going to do it then. If we ever get there, if I ever stop rambling. So, okay, we're back with Byron and Shelley on the next spread, pages 12 and 13. Again, these little 2-page chapters are working really well in this issue. It's really nicely done, and he's working in the 1-page ones with King, Mob, and Boy in these like single pages that are sort of buttressed by the adverts. But apart from that, he's using these nice. He's got these 3 separate scenes going on, using these nice big 2-page chapters, and there's something very satisfying about the drama of it, which is it just works. Good issue, this actually. Some of the conclusions it reaches aren't great, but it's a good issue. Well constructed, good bit of comic. We're with George and Percy again, or are we? So remember, Percy's kid died not long ago, and they and we start with a quote from lines written among the Euganean hills. Other flowering isles must be in the sea of life and agony. So yeah, and there's another basic dialogue between Shelley and Byron. Byron is basically saying it's a bit, Shelley has just lost a kid. He's obviously in mourning and struck by grief, and he kind of says, "Pull yourself together, mate," which isn't that great a thing to say. But even Shelley's aware that he's kind of prone to indulgence, right? He's the epitome of that kind of like romantic poet who's gonna climb inside his emotions and spend too long there. Fortunately, it's given us some really lovely poetry to be left with. And Byron's all like, "Come on, look, we're not poets we're not just invisible poets, right? Who've got a right to sort of try to imagine utopias that we can transmit into the future. We're also men, and we've got to give in to the fact that we just get sad about stuff." He says, but Byron is being very cynical at this point, and it turns out that it's not actually Byron, because Byron was still in Venice at this point, I think. Percy and Mary and Claire, we love Claire, had gone on by themselves, I think. Byron was off still gallivanting around. Maybe he'd headed to Greece, although I think it was later. I don't think he was in Greece for a few more years yet. George says, as an example of like how stupid it is for poets to spend their time trying to reconstruct the world, kind of consciously, rather than just like making poetry because it's cool, which is what Byron kind of was about. It's amazing how so this is like a Shelley's like idealized version of Byron. So he's got like a brilliant Byron mullet and a cloak and like rad boots, and he's got half a bottle of wine. He's very much like Byron as we imagine him, rather than as Byron as the man who we've sort of seen him as previously. But he's definitely, and his cynicism is, if anything, a bit more pronounced. It's because it is Shelley sort of giving it to him, if you like, within his own imagination. George says, "Remember pantisocracy, The vision of an ideal community dreamed up by Southey and Coleridge, in which all property was to be shared and men and women would live together as equals in pastoral bliss. Ha! How quickly the dream began to unravel when that priggish Christian virgin Southey began to complain bitterly about Coleridge's slovenly habits and perpetual dreaminess. Now, okay, lots of things that we could say about this. One, probably the most important one, is that pantisocracy is, ruled by panties, which makes it probably the coolest of any possible utopia that you can have. Pantisocracy, certainly the stupidest name that you could have for your idealized community. And also just again, it's Shelley giving Byron these words in his own imagination, so it's not necessarily what Byron would say, and it's not necessarily fair to Byron in having him say this, but it's also like his really prickish thing with Byron to say. Basically, Lord Byron, who, as we've discussed in previous episodes, he has no idea of his own status as like a product of society. Basically, he has this, and this is kind of like part of the romantic ideal, right? He has this notion that there is like a soul and a core in a man, and that is kind of immutable and constant, and he doesn't realize that it's produced. Basically, like, we do have souls, that's fine, but they are shared, they're shared across time and space by your many incarnations. They're not unique and unchanging in terms of how they may manifest in the human world, right? So you can have a Christian soul one year, and then next time around you can have a pagan soul. Like, these things aren't impossible. He doesn't seem to realise that the Lord Byron that he is basically a product of the society that he's in, that says, yeah, there are lords, and he happened to be one, right? So when he calls Robert Southey a priggish Christian virgin, which by all accounts, he wasn't a huge laugh, I don't think, Southey, and Coleridge having slovenly habits and perpetual dreaminess. Yeah, he was always nodding off, was old Sam Coleridge. He doesn't realise that like, in a utopian society, or even in a better society, right, it would produce better types of human, or different types of human anyway, and so you wouldn't have like Christian hang-ups around sexuality, and you wouldn't have the kind of you wouldn't have drug addicts, right, necessarily, right? You wouldn't need to have, or at least if you did, the addiction would be managed in such a way as to make them less perpetually dreamy than Coleridge was, right? So these things are these don't just, I mean, they do in part, but they don't just jump out of the romantic soul of your being. They're formed by the things and events around you as well, right? So George kind of just goes, these people are people, and that's exactly the way they are, and kind of the way they were always going to be, and the way they were meant to be. I'm George Byron, a legend. Southey was a virgin, and Coleridge was a junkie. Therefore, the idea that they would seek to create a better world is inherently ridiculous. And it's a bit like, well, that, to be fair, you wouldn't give Southey and Coleridge carte blanche to recreate the world from scratch. That you would need more practically minded men to do it. But pantisocracy sounds awful, by the way. Apart from the whole pants thing, like the kind of, it's like, yeah, we're just going to work 2 or 3 hours a day, and basically the women are going to do it. It's like, oh, hang on, guys, that's not great. So yeah, you wouldn't give poets a new world to build, in practical terms, but you would want your practical world to have poets who could think about great worlds, right? The work that Shelley is doing is still important. Is it more important than being with his wife as they mourn the death of their child? No. Byron has a point there, but he doesn't have a point about the pre-existence of better worlds in poetry as a precondition for their creation in the real world. Like, he's kind of wrong about that. And then Shelley kind of, this is about as close as it gets as the Invisibles as a series, as a comic book. It's about as close as it gets to placing its flag in the sand. This is what we believe. This is what we're about. If the Invisibles has a credos, then this is probably where it is. I cannot stop. This is Shelley. He says, I cannot stop talking to the future. I have so much I must say to the unborn suffering multitudes. I know where utopia lies. It is here. He's pointing to his head. Where is the love, beauty and truth we seek but in our mind? The golden country forever new, the home of all hearts, untouched by time and pain? Here, waiting for us to grow up and recognise it and come home. Now, the problem with utopia is that the whole point of utopia is that it's perfect, and it kind of exists in the future as something which isn't real, but it drags you towards it. And in the process, you don't make a society that's perfect, but you make a society that's better. Yeah, like no one's expecting that. You can't eliminate suffering and desire from the human body, but you can make stuff better. You can give people free education and houses, and just make stuff better. What's kind of dispiriting about this is that, like, from this perspective, from this vantage point, it's really clear how sort of normative this kind of like rebel literature was, right? This statement of Shelley's is, it's neoliberalism, it's Blairism. It's like, it's okay, we can make you happy with Prozac. It's like, it's just kind of a bit disappointingly mainstream. It's just the thing that everyone was saying at the time, and which we now have kind of a lot of evidence to suggest is kind of not right. You need to, the struggle to make a better world exists within us and without us simultaneously, and the struggle has to be fought on both fronts at the same time. And he does seem to be, and I'm sure this is kind of a bit conscious, but Shelley seems to be repeating the problem that that Neil Cassady gives us back on page 1, where he says, all we had to do was get fucked up on LSD and we'd all turn into super people and build the promised land out of rainbows and flowers. He's kind of saying that. He's basically saying, Shelley is saying, if we just turn on, if we free our minds, our asses will follow. And it's a bit like, yeah, but you need to build a cushion for your ass. You need a nice pair of trousers. Otherwise it's kind of it's meaningless. You end up being as dispirited as this guy is here. And to kind of have it rephrased in Shelley's kind of romantic notion, this big goofy grin that he's got on his face while he's saying it. I really think we're supposed to believe him here and have a little, and we're supposed to nod in agreement. I think that's what the text really wants us to do, because you see this big fat white border between these panels. Like this drama is being really slowed down. We're really being encouraged to think about it, to notice it as it happens. This big close up with his daft grin. And it's not good enough, basically, as a philosophy for the comic to have, to say, like, it's okay, we can all just retreat inside our minds and create a happiness for ourselves there. It doesn't matter if the world's going to shit. If you've got like an elevated perspective that kind of makes you go, yeah, but I'm all right, Jack. That's not good enough. So it's a bit disappointing there, I think. And obviously Shelley's, his argument is, predicted by, or the failure of his argument is predicted by Neil Cassady here. It is Shelley saying it, and we know that he's a bit daft, and he's emotionally wrecked at the moment as well. But there's something about this kind of the sweetness of this moment which feels a little bit like the comic's not quite working hard enough to give us its answer yet. But we're still only on issue 8. We've got a long way to go. And this argument does get looked at from many sides, many times subsequent to this. But as a kind of its statement of like, this is what I believe, this is what the invisible philosophy is, it feels a bit disappointing at this point. Sidebar. So like I say, this is a really important page, yeah? This is the page where we get our big hug and we get our kind of moment of triumph almost. Although, there's a couple more pages to come. But this is like, yeah, this is our moment right here. Remember my little side theory about the word este, and how for some reason the word este had sort of crept into the previous 2 issues. And my theory was that like the este family is basically like the key Illuminati family, like the key magical Illuminati sorcerer family. This bit here, our big punchy moment, and the kind of the finale of this page isn't Shelley's face, we get a little bit of after our like dramatic high point, our little apotheosis here. We do get a little couple of bars of reflective space, of like open space, literally. That's Este. Like, this is literally where they are. They're in a villa outside Este, in Este, in Este County, if not the town itself, where Shelley wrote those lines written among the Euganean hills, which is a poem about it's like Shelley's gap year, basically. It's exactly what Morrison's travelogues are in the back. It's like Shelley going, I went to Venice, I went to Padua, and if you combine those things, Italy's lovely. It's one of all of the poems that we've had kind of thrown at us here, apart from the bit that we see in a minute. It's a little bit, okay, it's beautiful, but it's a bit kind of dumb compared to some of his other ones. But this is Este. This kind of like, if you're looking for like yet more evidence, which obviously I am, of my theory that there's a hidden stream of Este-ist Illuminism in these 4 issues, or at least these 3 issues of Arcadia, this is it, because our big moment literally happens in Este, and the line is, it's waiting for us to grow up and recognize it and come home, as if to say, this is the geographic, the literal heart and origin point of this entire, intellectual, philosophical, political tradition, which, as we've seen, covers, Silicon Valley technotopias, the French Revolution, the Romantic philosophy, the kind of the affective aberrant psychologies uncovered by the Marquis de Sade. All of this stuff is all of that kind of cybernetic tackle, it's all being told to us here as being Este is its home. So my theory is correct, is what I'm saying. Great to be me. Back in the windmill. Fanny's laying it down now, right? Like I say, she's kind of, her and Jack together are staging this like impromptu exorcism of this evil demon that's come to kill them. As the grown up in the room, frankly, Fanny is leading the way. She allows herself to become possessed by a whole pantheon of like Aztec gods, basically. Fanny is Brazilian. I'm not sure how big the Aztec gods were in Brazil, and frankly, I don't know because I haven't done any research on it yet. There's going to be we get loads of really cool names here: Ometeotl, Tezcatlipoca, Tlaloc, Mictlantecutli, Xipe-Totec. I can't pronounce that one at all. A couple of them are really tricky to pronounce. When we get into Fanny's story, we're going to do a whole load of Aztec/Mayan mythology stuff, right? So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail here, but basically, there are these badass gods from like Fanny's homeworld. Again, I don't know how big these gods are in Brazil, where Fanny comes from. They're obviously like Mexican, and like if you're from Britain, Mexico, Brazil, like honestly, British people think that North America means Canada, America means the USA, and South America is anything below that. So Brazil, Mexico, same thing, mate. Do you know what I mean? When the reality is obviously quite different. So we're going to dig into that in a few issues' time when we get to Lord Fanny's actual story. Suffice it to say, she is at this stage allowing herself to become possessed by the god of the dead to fuck with Orlando, basically. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, no, that's fine. I'll say that bit in a minute. So Jack just kind of like, he grabs a knife. Having already shot him and that not work, he grabs a knife and stabs Orlando through the hand and pins him to this wooden pillar. See, like, so all of these elements of pinning the demon to an object, or especially like a wooden object. These are all improvised parts of a fairly classical exorcism structure. Allowing oneself to be ridden by like a bigger demon than the demon that you're facing. As we remember, when we saw Orlando at the beginning, he invoked the name of Xipe-Totec. He was saying that he is the flesh-stealing god. And Mictlantecutli, the badass god of the dead here, Skull Dude, who Fanny is being ridden by, knows this. He knows that Orlando is Xipe-Totec. and or has stolen the name of ᴥThe, and the lords are not pleased. Fanny's going to open a door into hell and suck Orlando back there. It's really interesting to think how long Orlando might have been here when Orlando stole the name of ᴥThe. So like, it would be brilliant if France. Yeah, I mean, it would be brilliant if France had a bigger role. I'm not saying they had no role, but if they'd had a bigger role in the conquest of the Aztecs, right? Because then Orlando being this kind of French icon of like negative nationalisms and of state construction and all of that bloody work that he does. You could have made a nice story about Orlando going to Mexico and becoming ᴥThe way back then, kind of thing. Like, but it's quite plausible that Orlando he stole the name of ᴥThe several hundred years ago, and in the way that these god dudes see time, that wouldn't be too much of a thing. And then so Fanny opens the door into hell. We get the similar sort of light effects around the windmill that we had when they were time traveling. So basically, the magic up is working and it's the same kind of magic, opening a door to hell, opening a door into the past. That visual link is made quite explicit, and then Orlando goes no as he gets sucked into hell. Don't take me back, and it's very I've said it enough, obviously, but it's very Hellraiser the way that the light starts to kind of pour out of him, and he's like no, and he's well dramatic, but he's pinned in place by Jack's knife, and that's like kind of accidentally kind of was doing some Googling the other day, found out that in the Hellraiser comics, which date from around 1992, so very possibly within roughly the same sort of time frame as this, probably the Hellraiser comic happened before this. It says that that Pinhead from Hellraiser, the guy with the pins in his head, is an incarnation of ᴥThe. So all of this, this is obviously Hellraiser stuff with the ᴥThe thing. You really wouldn't put it past Morrison to have just nicked that from some Clive Barker comics that he'd read, and it's fine because he's done it well, and it's obviously kind of it's obviously partly a tribute as much as it is a rip-off, and it fits very nicely into the like the magpie quality that the Invisibles has, but it fits with Morrison's project too, right? He makes it seem right. So yeah, I don't know. I bet he read that. I wouldn't be surprised if he read that in a Hellraiser comic and went, "Oh yeah, that's cool. I'm nicking that." But yeah, hooray! Oh yeah, over the page. This is still very Hellraiser-y. All of the it's like all of the bit where the body in Hellraiser builds itself out of the blood and kind of jumps out of the floorboards in that amazing sequence in the first Hellraiser film in reverse. Whoa! And he's like, "No, I won't go, please." And Jack's like, "Fucking hell, what's that singing? It's horrible." The singing, we presume, is the lamenting voices of the unworld calling Orlando back in. Bad scene for Orlando. And then there's like a night, because that's quite heavy and like extra. And it all goes. The visuals go all kind of trippy and abstract while the light and the blood and the gore just kind of happens. There's a cheeky little cut in the middle of this page here, and it's like there's one of the hippies is tripping out at, at the club where Boy and King Mob are, and it's like she's somehow just seen all of this through her kind of VR goggles. They're not really VR goggles. They are like, they just kind of like bling sort of lights at you. They're like a kind of a portable dream machine. They bling flashing lights at you and it triggers a trance. She's also done some Syrian rue, which is, like a harmala extract, which, stops serotonin reuptake or something, or is it? Or like or one of the neurotransmitters basically makes your drug stronger. If you're tripping on acid or mushrooms or DMT, I guess, psychedelics, entheogens, it stops your brain from metabolizing the stuff quicker. So it just makes your trip longer and stronger. but it's almost like, oh, she's tripping so hard that she's actually somehow seeing what's going on across space and time in the windmill. And there's some, like, Jill Thompson does brilliant stuff with all of the people in the chill out room, tripping out there, like, just nice little cheeky details in the panels of these kind of funny hippies, all like spaced out. 90s hippies, techno hippies. And she says, "Oh, I feel like my head's going to come off, like something's downloading into my brain." Wait for that one. That'll come back to us. Also worth noting, these aren't VR goggles, like I say, they're blippy goggles, but they're a bit like VR goggles in the sense that they cut you off and give you like and do all of that kind of visual field of stimulus stuff that does trigger different head states in you. Worth noting that our boy Antonin Artaud, who wrote No More Firmament, who's quoted here a few pages before, he came up with the term virtual reality. He kind of, given that he wasn't a neurologist or anything, he was pretty far ahead of his time in realizing that, this is one of Artaud's kind of like concepts, that there's a kind of the human brain builds a representation of its entire body and brain within itself, and and that can affect the overall organism just as much as what actually happens to it. So if you can just you can control the entire body just by going in through the eyes, just by going in through the mind and influencing the mind like that. I did some cheesy VR stuff recently, and there was like a scary one, and like a crazy dentist with a drill kind of comes and like drills you in your mouth. And what was really weird was that I could taste the taste of the dentist while this scary, crazy dentist was drilling in my teeth. I could taste dentist taste. I could taste the the minty kind of medicine-y taste of the dentist. I could taste that while he was dentisting me. So this whole body without organs thing that Deleuze and Guattari built on from Antonin Artaud's work, VR does unlock it, make it kind of apparent in a way which is kind of technologically replicable, and cybery and digital and all that stuff, and tech. It's young people, it's tech, it's exciting. So that's the thing. King Mob and Bowyer sort of watching all this go on, and King Mob gets one of his excellent lines: "Hedonic engineering and development, the new revolution from one bunch of heads to another in 200 years." And the way that all of these people are like lolling around on the beanbags, it does look a bit like the pictures of the headless bodies that we saw in France a couple of issues back. It's a good line. The hedonic engineering and development, H.E.A.D, which is where this issue gets its title from. That's like a Leary Wilson thing, and like another Illuminatus reference, basically. Although maybe more of a Cosmic Trigger reference, I suppose. That basically is hedonic engineering and development. Is like you get, you free your mind in the free your mind and your ass will follow philosophy by exploring hedonism. Yeah, you explore pleasure. You become aware that like Judeo-Christian, I hate that word, concepts of sin or whatever aren't, and that having a body can be fun and good, and through that so through the portal of pleasure, basically one goes on to develop higher faculties and get and it's like good old fashioned spiritual enlightenment. And religious rapture, but you go in through the body rather than pretending that the body doesn't exist. Much as we've discussed with the virtual reality thing, the body doesn't exist. Yeah, it all happens in a kind of a meta body that's without organs, that's laid over the top of the body that you're actually sitting in. So that's what the head thing is that you kind of you get in through you get into your head, you get out of your head by going into your head through the portal of pleasure, basically. And I think he thinks it's a bit dumb because the King Mob believes that like the Invisibles have got this big ass project of like cosmic utopia with badass killing and blowing stuff up, which is kind of his route into it, like super cool assassination. And Boy's like, yeah, I've had enough of all this. I enjoyed the dancing. but I'm worried about everybody now. I'm the practical one. It's time to get back to the windmill now and get back to our bodies. And they've kind of done their job, right? They've dropped off the Marquis de Sade. He's having a really good time at the rave. He's chatting to a couple of space age flower children, pixie goth demon rave girls, or whatever they're called. I'm too old to know stuff like that, and that's fine. But he's having a really nice time with them, and they're telling him about Terence Mckenna. Terence Mckenna is like the Leary and Kesey of this kind of resurgent redux rave scene from the 90s, right? There was a lot of, and some of this is intentional, and there are indeed conspiracy theories about the obvious kind of imagistic and thematic connections between the Summer of Love in the 60s and the Summer of Love in the late 80s, that it kind of spawned the rave scene, and how it's testing a different generation of psychoactive compounds that could be used as potential mind control drugs, or as potential pacifiers of people, which maybe had a kickback effect of kind of creating new commonalities that the man wasn't ready for. He was surprised by the subversive use that the drugs were put to, or maybe not. Maybe that's all just kind of spectacularized nonsense, and there's nothing rebellious about raving whatsoever. Maybe that's exactly what they wanted you to do. Although I tend not to think so. Basically, I tend not to think so. We will get to that another time, because after all, they did have to invent Britpop to get people out of the fields and back into the pubs. But so there's a conspiracy theory around the use of the smiley face logo in the 60s and in the 80s/90s, and the way that these two scenes did seem to link up in a way which strikes some people as kind of somewhat inorganic and suspicious, but it's probably not. The fact is, people were looking back deliberately. Like, not all forms of cultural exchange and copying require a CIA conspiracy, although most do. But they're talking about Terence Mckenna. They're talking about the singularity. See, this is one of them. See, it's like I could do a San Francisco accent, couldn't I? See, it's like there's this attractor at the end of time, like a sort of singularity, a black hole, and it's pulling us all towards it, so things are getting faster. History's going to end on the morning of History's going to end on the morning of December 22nd, 2012. That's what Terence Mckenna says. You can work it out with the I Ching. I'll be like 35, which sucks. I was like 34, I think, in December 2012. How old were you? Where were you? Tell me your 2012 stories. When we broke the barrier of the eschaton and fell into the future. Where were you? What were you up to? And she says, McKenna's theory is that, like, at that singularity point, nowadays we kind of talk about the singularity as being specifically a tech thing. The singularity is the point where tech replaces the human as the kind of the active agent of history. It's the point where humans and tech become indistinguishable, and the singularity point is an AI which can transform humans as much as humans are transformed from monkeys in the blink of an upload or whatever. And this is all in the works of Terence Mckenna. The stuff about 2012. Well, a lot of the Invisibles mythology builds toward 2012, so we'll talk about that a bit more, kind of much further down the line. It's important to reflect that DMT and Terence Mckenna are the Leary Kesey thing of their age, and this is all kind of just happening again. I will say, and I wouldn't say this about Kesey or Leary, but I would say this about Terence Mckenna, and this is one of those deliberate Invisibles bits where it drops a name in the hope that you'll go and check it out. And I'm doing the same here. Go and check out Terence Mckenna's stuff on YouTube. It's absolutely fascinating and fabulous. His writing can be a little bit chewy, and certainly with retrospect, some of the I Ching, Time Wave Zero, Mayan calendar stuff looks a little bit sus. Although obviously it does create a connection between the Mayan stuff that we were looking at on the previous page. We're not quite done with that kind of Mayan, Aztec, stroke Mexican kind of axis yet for this issue, but there is one more kind of way that we're going to go through it. Check out Terence Mckenna's stuff on YouTube, because he's an absolutely captivating speaker. He's got a really good sense of humour, really good, like, broad, cultured frame of reference. Doesn't take what he's saying too seriously, although he is very sort of passionate and sincere about it, but he also is very sort of good at talking about the inherent ridiculousness of it. He also kind of doesn't really let you forget while he's talking. He doesn't get too pious about what he's up to, even though he does believe he's doing something very kind of like profound. He never seems to forget that like what he's really doing is getting off his face and having a really good time, which is kind of clearly like important to him. But it does have this kind of profound spiritual other dimensional dimension where once you, and she talks about it here, if you take DMT, you get connected up with the machine elves on the other side. It's so weird. So his description of like a DMT trip involves meeting the machine elves. You know, they're kind of like the silver blobs of spirit matter and I think this is the reason that it's beyond all the singularity stuff, which will become relevant later. Beyond the singularity stuff, it's relevant to this because the thing that McKenna describes the machine elves, these blobs, as doing is speaking or singing, but they create a language, and because you're tripping, you can see the words in front of you. The words that the elves create become part of the hallucination, a thing that you can see, and indeed the way that McKenna describes them is as beautiful, impossibly complex, multifaceted, solid, semi-autonomous and intelligent objects within their own right. So elf language, in elf language, they do signatura, right? Signatura is like the theory that the name of a thing and the appearance of a thing and the thing itself are all the same thing, which is why like the name of a god can be holy. Why? Because the name of a god is in certain respect the god itself. And angel language, or the elf language of the DMT elves, angels, sorry, I've kind of spoiled myself a bit there, does the words become things. Language doesn't have this kind of abstract quality, it solidifies. But really, you've already gone through into the elf dimension, right? So you've gone abstract already, and when you get abstract and can see language, it's almost like you can see it in these three-dimensional forms. So when we're talking about the poetry of Byron and Shelley, or the abstracting language of the Templars, or of money itself, of capital itself, or of John Dee's angel language, Enochian, which we had our guy Etienne doing a couple of issues ago. All of these kind of like, poetry, code, all of the cryptography, ciphers, all of these forms of language. If you are already abstract, you can see how complex and object-ish they are, right? How they kind of exist as actual forms. So imagine what a word does when you say it, all of the space that the air encompasses, all of the meaning that it covers, all of the potential meanings that can spin off from it, all of the different contexts that word could possibly be used in, and all of the different signals and apprehensions that it could create in the viewer of the word, or the receiver of the word, in kind of the information signal theory terms of it. The elves do show that. Like, you can see that when you do DMT and connect to the elves. You can see elf language, which kind of looks like our language, with all of its abstracting taken away, made solid, and all of its kind of marvellous complexity there for you. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about language and concepts as having an objecthood, as being there in some way. And if they're there, then they can be manipulated and applied and reapplied to various different functions beyond the kind of that signaling communicative function that we tend to think of language as being for, right? It's not just about saying what the object is, it's about recreating the object in a higher dimension by saying its name, by saying its word. I also thought, reading this bit, I'm quite old now, and I haven't done DMT yet, and that I would like that to change. So I don't think you're really allowed to use the internet to do this. But if you've got a cool DMT hookup in, south of England way, give us a shout. Get in touch. Let's meet up at a motorway service station and do DMT at McDonald's. It would be fun, right? Let's do that. Help me out. King Mob was talking to Decade. Decade's getting on quite well with this manic pixie thing. King Mob's like, mate, we're going. Is that all right? And he's kind of doing this quite creepy move here, which is, I guess, what you would do as you were saying goodbye to the Marquis de Sade. He's kind of like playing with his kind of like proxy nipple piercing gold hoop thing that he's got on his horrible t-shirt. It's a bit like, don't do that. He's like, yeah, and then he's like, yeah. Decade's like, yeah, leave me here. He's like, well, some other invisibles are going to come and pick you up. Is that all right? He's like, yeah, I may be a ghost, but I'm kind of into it. Like, he's definitely his dirty little mind is working away. Bless him. Over the page. This is like your get into it page. Every issue has like a page or a spread where you have to get into it a bit. I think this is the one. This one goes on and on, lads. Sorry. Yeah. We're back in. We've just had the Cyphermen freaking out. Robin has left the church at Rennes Chateau and is back outside talking to the devil guy, right? Who was talking to Mary Shelley on the coach and handed her the apple and commented on her baby looking poorly, all of that kind of stuff, and is also playing chess. By him playing chess with himself, he's sitting sideways on to the. He's sitting sideways on. It looks like, is he? Yeah, I think he's sitting sideways on to the chessboard. And he's playing chess with himself, and he says queen to f7, mate. Queen probably is Robin in this context. She's just outmaneuvered all of the Cyphermen, who are obviously very like pawns. I have to say, I'm not a chess expert, but he says mate here as if to say he's like one side or another has won this war, or this phase of the war, given that the war goes on forever. And unless, so this is panel 4 of page 18, unless there's like a rook literally being covered up by that bit of Robin's hair on the board that we can't see, unless there's a rook there, I don't think it is checkmate. I don't think it is. I think his king can take that pawn quite safely, actually. Yeah. And in fact, there's, yeah. So I don't, yeah, so it's not checkmate, but it's the, when you're out there playing chess by yourself and like someone comes up and goes, oh, checkmate. It makes you look cool, right? So, he's like, so, we might have to go through this whole page. There's loads going on. Before we do, one of the reasons that we're doing this Invisible podcast, and one of the reasons that you lovely people are along for the journey, you're not really there, I get it, it's okay. It's to sort of test how active this magical object is, right? How reach-outy it is still. Because when I was little and I started reading this, it reached out and grabbed me very strongly. And one of the reasons I'm doing the podcast is to sort of undo that grabbing a little bit, find the bits of the grabbing that I think are still useful, and and allow myself to get grabbed again, quite frankly. But do it kind of consciously, and yeah, with a mind to kind of keeping the good bits, ditching the bits which aren't so helpful. But obviously on the back of my mind was like, well, maybe I just will be bored. Maybe the Invisibles won't grab me anymore. That hasn't happened. I didn't think I'd be bored, but I thought it might be a bit inert. Yeah, I thought it just might not have that capacity to reach out anymore. So, the last episode was really late because it was just a nightmare doing it. I know that the stars are bad in June, right? Getting anything done straightforwardly has been a hassle. I'm sure wherever you are in June of 2019, you experienced a ton of hassle just doing basic things. Apparently that's all kind of given to us by the stars. What is... So I was thinking ahead, right? I had sort of finished the last month's issuesode 7, and was working on issuesode 8, and I was kind of thinking, oh, where am I going to go with this head stuff? Where's this John the Baptist's head stuff going to go? And I was thinking about Oscar Wilde. I was thinking about Salome. Walking home, and just, you know, sometimes you do just get that weird feeling, right? You do. You get that weird feeling, and you know that something is maybe there. If you live anywhere like me, you know that there are certain like recycling bins around. And it's often worth just keeping an eye on it, because somebody will have left some records there, or some books, or even some furniture that you can upcycle. There's a spot just around the corner from me, which is reliable. Like, it's always worth having a look, because there'll be something interesting there. When I was there on this particular evening, as I was kind of trying to post the last issuesode, all kinds of computer hassles had been making this a very long drawn out process, and thinking about what I was going to do for the new one, this one that you're watching now, there was like a load of just crap strewn around this recycling point. And like I say, it's worth stopping for a few seconds and just having a look, making sure there's nothing that you want to. Loads of stuff there that I didn't want. Some books which were like in a different life might be quite interesting, but like, you know, who am I kidding? I'm not actually going to read them. Better to leave them there for somebody else who really wants them, right? That's just neighbourly. And there was, there was some old jazz records there. There was some, academic social psychology looking stuff there. Like I say, interesting, but, not really my cup of tea. And there was this there, which did catch my eye. And it's an issue of the Fortean Times, the kind of the venerable, weirdo, high strangeness, UFO, Crazy Time magazine from Britain. It's been around forever. Has its ups and downs, even a little bit Brexit at the moment, to be honest. Like some of the blokes who write for it now are proper, like they've gone as proper old gits. But it's never less than interesting, and I love it. I love the 14 Times. My wife really loves it. She's been kind of reading it, if not subscribing to it fully, for ever since I've known, ever since before we got together. So, and we've been together nearly 20 years or whatever. So there's loads of 14 Timeses in my life. But I didn't recognise this one. It dates from June 1998. It is number 111. 111. Which feels significant, doesn't it? And I stopped and looked amongst all of this stuff, and I found it. And I was like, oh, brilliant. A copy of the 14 Times. Didn't look like one I'd seen before. My wife would love this. My little shiver of anticipation had paid off, because I got a nice present for the missus. Take it home, blah blah blah. Forget about it. She's like, oh, thanks. Day or two later, she's like, have you read that 14 Times? And I'm like, no. And she goes, why not? And I'm like, well, it's for you. Well, you should have a look at it. It looked kind of fun, right? And then kind of I glanced at it. It was still on the coffee table. And the ultimate heresy, this jumped out at me. The ultimate heresy, the secret cult that hates Christ. And I knew in a flash, Shazam, what that was. I knew that there was going to be an article in here about the cult of John the Baptist, basically. And the Johannite heresy, which is basically that there is like a kind of a secret seam within Christianity, of which Leonardo da Vinci, that guy again. This predates the Da Vinci Code. Pretty sure, predates the Da Vinci Code. The book would be out within the next, year or so, I'm sure, because this is 1998. So I think Da Vinci Code was probably like turn of the century, 2001 at the latest. So within a few years, this weirdo 14 Times story went super hyper mainstream. Not that it hadn't before, because it's the old Holy Blood Grenadier. It's the Rennes-le-Château story. I've been reading about the Rennes-le-Château story in these previous issues. I had my head full of invisible stuff, and then this copy of the 14 Times, which is a way that I've learned lots of stuff over the days, or has kind of given me pointers towards lots of other things over the years. Jumps out at me. The Johannite heresy is basically Jesus isn't the real Jesus. John the Baptist is the real Jesus. The way that it kind of makes sense to me, and there's all these kind of like historical, and the kind of the Jesus guys are obviously have been in the ascendancy throughout history, but the Templar heresy, the Cathar heresy, they were all secret. So obviously they were Marianites, kind of, plus also instead, depending on what your read is. But they could have been Johannites, so they could have thought that John the Baptist was the real Jesus, like the one kind of the actual, savior, stroke God incarnated, stroke Messiah, And there's been there's this kind of behind the scenes battle of history between the Jesusites and the Johannites as to kind of who the real kind of object of Christianity should be. It's super interesting. It's kind of got all of the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Head of John the Baptist, Templar, Rennes-le-Château mystery stuff in it. So it's like this kind of like secret mystical stream of thought kind of lying under and rearing up to struggle at various points in history with like mainstream Christianity. Like the reason for it is, I think, is basically that think of it as like L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige, right? The current leader, like the founder and the current leader of Scientology. Imagine yourself 100 years in the future. Scientology is kind of like still a young, and probably still, let's just say, still growing church. You're going to have Hubbardites and Miscavigites, right? You're going to have the one who was there first, and then you're going to have the one who made it big. Yeah? You're going to have the one who who came up with the original concept, and then you're going to have the guy who proselytized it. Obviously, that pattern is in Christianity already, right? You've got St. Paul doing all of the Jesus work, taking that to the public, changing Christianity for the worse, and irrevocably almost straight away as soon as it got big. But you've got that, right? You've got a founder, but then you've got another guy who comes along, builds on his ideas, sets things up, sets up that infrastructure, that network, and that organization, that bureaucracy, if you like, that allows the religious meme to spread, allows the church to be built. I think the reason why that is, and the reason why it seems to always be Gnostics who are attracted to this Johannite thing, where they prefer John the Baptist to Jesus, Qatar's Templars, Leonardo da Vinci's, Priory of Scions, is because I think basically it boils down to John the Baptist's take on redemption is less kind of intermediary-ish than Jesus is. Basically, John was a Gnostic insofar as he's like, look, it's just you, it's just God or the numinous, it's just take yourself down to the river, get yourself baptized, forgive your sins, crack on, go about your business. The Jesus take requires intercession by another person between you and God a lot more, right? It lends itself to organizational structures much more. Like it kind of does say, well, you sort of do need me to do the talking to God for you, and that obviously that can scale in a way that just you and a river doesn't. Yeah, in terms of like having a good thing going on here comes in. So this is so I find this 14 times thing. It's all about the Johannite the Johannite heresy as it comes through Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is one of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, which is the kind of the made up, or is it? It is. Made up secret, super secret society, like secret society within ancient Templarism that was protecting the secret of the Templars and of Rennes-le-Château, which, as we found out here, is the head of John the Baptist. Yeah. So that kind of pushed me into realizing that this was like our significant moment, right? This is the bit that the books, the Arcadia, that is about. And the devil says to Robin, "Did you hear it? Did you learn the secret of the Knights Templar? Did you hear what Berenger can't pronounce that, ᴥThe, heard over 100 years ago. So this is happening in the present day. He thought it was the voice of the demon Asmodeus, the adversary of the Baptist. Now, I don't know a huge amount about Christianity, really. I'm getting better. But that didn't sound right when I read that. I was like, really? I reckon I'd have heard if John the Baptist was had Asmodeus, the famous Goetic demon, as his adversary. I reckon I'd know that. So I went and checked that out a little bit as well. Didn't sound right. You know, he is friends with Jesus when he's a kid. Has got a good thing going on down by the lakes of the River Jordan. Yeah, River Jordan. I don't know. Jesus goes to him and goes, yeah, look, I'm the Son of God, but I even need to be baptized by this cat, which does imply that this cat was important as Jesus, right? If he's making him holy, then he's holy too. He slags off Herod for remarrying the wife of his defeated enemy. Pisses off Herod's wife and daughter. Daughter is Salome. Dance of the Seven Veils. Herod is kind of forced. Oh well, Herod's a total lech. He's really creepy. Fancies his stepdaughter. She kind of tricks him into committing to delivering the head of John the Baptist. John the Baptist gets executed. Head of John the Baptist. That's where it comes from. But I didn't know anything about Asmodeus and any of that. So I looked it up. You can do it. It's the internet. And I was right. Go me. Asmodeus isn't the adversary of John the Baptist. He's the adversary of John the Apostle. Yeah? Like St. John. Didn't write the Book of Revelations. Or did he? No, I think he did write the Book of John. There's too many Johns. Son of Zebedee from the Magic Carnival, right? Magic Carnival? Can't be the Magic Carnival. What's the old kids show? You're too young, you don't remember. It's fine. So Asmodeus isn't the enemy of John the Baptist. Okay, but I told you that we'd come back to Asmodeus last week now, because it's important. So this guy here, I've been calling him the devil because that's what the scripts call him, and I know that, and I couldn't really be bothered to go through the whole mystery of like, who's this guy? Because it just obfuscates a bit of what I'm trying to talk about with this whole Invisibles podcast malarkey. The study of the devil, as we know, goes way back to the 60s and the Rolling Stones, and he's a man of wealth and taste, a bit like this. He's old, but he doesn't look old. He's quite a dandified fella. Now, back in the Middle Ages, if you kind of bumped into a demon or got possessed or whatever, they wouldn't kind of go like the poor woman, it often is, isn't it? Being tormented wouldn't be like, oh, it's a particular devil has got me. She'd just be like, the devil's got me. The devil's just a blanket term. You've got your Lucifers, you've got your Satans, your adversaries, you've got your serpent in the Garden of Eden, all of whom may or may not be a bit the same. But obviously then there's all of these hosts of other slightly lesser demons. No offence intended. Slightly lesser demons. From like the devil. But kind of the devil is also just like a kind of a broader term which encompasses all of them just as a, for convenience sake, right? Asmodeus, he's got the leg, one of his legs is a chicken's leg, but apart from that, he is a man of wealth and taste. He often appears as like a cultured gent who doesn't lie. Now, I know all this from Sebastian Michaelis's 1612 book, An Admirable History of Possession and Confession of a Penitent Woman. Basically, there's like a possession outbreak at a nunnery. This kind of like inquisitor guy, Sebastian Michaelis, goes in with another guy. They start making notes. Basically, they start interviewing the possessed people, exorcising them, and keeping really thorough notes of everything that the possessed nuns are saying about all of these devils and demons that are possessing them. And this is now like a source. This is one of the most complete sources of medieval demonology, basically. Loads of stuff about Asmodeus is in there. Loads of the stuff that we know about Asmodeus now, 500 years later. Exactly 500 years later to 2012. You can tell how old you are by whether you do the X-Files whistle or the Twilight Zone theme tune when something spooky happens. I don't know what the modern day equivalent of it would be. A meme, but I don't know which one. And that's where the stuff about Asmodeus being a or the devil who tempts Saint John the Apostle after Jesus is gone, after Jesus has been resurrected and ascended and has kind of left the apostles behind to kind of crack on with the whole building Christianity thing. John the Evangelist, rather than, my notes are useful, I should look at them. He goes through a period, the other John, not John the Baptist, where he is being tempted, and Michaelis identifies Asmodeus as being the demon responsible for doing that, but he also says this: Asmodeus, thou art ever whispering in their ears and saying, you are to think of an empire, and then you must conquer the whole world like another Alexander. Now, I'm going to leave aside the Este connection there, but it's a good one, the whole Venice thing. Asmodeus, this guy who may or may not be this guy, because he can be Asmodeus and still just be the devil, right? Spends his time telling people to think of building empires and conquering the whole world. Okay? One of his trademark temptations, the whole lust thing is like a bit, that's like a really like Christian gloss on it, right? Lust isn't bad. It's just the way that you manage it and relate to it. Lust is just your body going, yeah, happy time. And that's not a bad thing. It's, in fact, really good and important. But the other thing that Asmodeus likes to do is whisper in people's ears and convince them to start empires and try to conquer the whole world. Now, that's definitely relevant to at least half of the Invisibles equation, as I'm sure you'd agree. And if we're told that Asmodeus was John the Evangelist's tempter, but also that, so John the Evangelist, he spreaded the word right before it got to St. Paul, who kind of then turned it all into like, the whole point of the church was just like hating women and stuff. If it was about, like, maybe the real Johannite heresy has got nothing to do with John the Baptist's head. Maybe it's got to do with the fact that St. John the Evangelist tried to build an empire because he was tempted to do so by Asmodeus, whose whole thing is tempting people to build empires. Okay? Maybe there's just so much more happening here than we kind of think. Anyway. Okay, there's that's like panel 3. There's loads more. And let's call him Asmodeus from now on. Let's just go with it. See if it throws up anyone. Asmodeus says, he said, "Did you hear the voice of the Templar, of the head of John the Baptist?" I heard it. Yeah, it's the language, isn't it? Asmodeus says it's the true tongue, lost after Babel, Tower of Babel. Everybody can speak the same language. All the nations of man are unified in their arrogance that they can be unified. Zap, tower falls, bad scene. Humans never understand each other again and spend, and then just fight like we do, yeah? And the symbolism of the severed head contains mysteries within mysteries. Okay, obviously, worshipping a head, it's not really that weird. Like a skull, it's like if you're going to worship anyone or anything, why wouldn't a skull is a fairly obvious one to do, isn't it? Ancestor worship, particularly if it's like a king or a wise man or a much loved man or person, a wise one. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. If you can kind of do it while you're entering altered states of consciousness through prayer or fasting or LSD or psilocybin, whatever. Maybe it would talk to you. Yeah, maybe the head would offer you something which you could take and use and go away with. But the symbolism of the severed head contains mysteries within mysteries. Some of those mysteries, the ones I just mentioned, they're not that weird. They don't seem terribly irrational, do they? That's just what we know about kind of the way that people behave and worship. But let's have another look. Let's have another look at the symbolism of the head. So we've already gone into the eye and how it maybe sits atop a triangle. But let's have another look at what we've got here. We've got a head, and then we've got some cogs, some machinery, some workings underneath it. We've got wires coming out of the head, radiating off into space. And as we saw earlier, we've got a key. You might even say a keyboard, chessboard, keyboard, key. Where's the key? Key activating the head of John the Baptist and telling people language that only they want to hear. You know where I'm going by now. You can see this coming a mile off. I'm laying it on too thick. But if you're watching this on a laptop rather than on your phone or tablet, you can see this right now. I'll do it profile and try and look with like a crazy eye like he is on the. Imagine cogs here. Imagine I've got hair radiating outwards. This is what you're doing, right? This is the whole thing. The symbolism of the head is literally a computer. It's got some eyes on the top. It looks at you. You look at it. There's cogs and keys underneath. Keyboard. That was right. That was the pun there. The head of John the Baptist construct, the treasure of the Templars, is basically a guide to building computers. That's why they're in San Francisco. That's why Byron, whose daughter, as we discussed last time, would take her husband's art of manipulating language to do incredible things to a totally new level, abstracting the world around her into a form of language which could be reprocessed and reproduce anything, including this network of control technologies, stroke empire building machines that you're looking at me on now and that rule the world that we live in, not for the better. We'll get to that on the last page. But yeah, no shit, the symbolism of the severed head contains mysteries within mysteries. Robin says, and in Arcadia or Paradise or whatever, in Arcadia or Paradise or Utopia or whatever you want to call it, we'll all speak like the head in there? Is that it? The treasure is a new language? No, not new, eternal. Glossolalia is the language of ecstasy and dreams. Ecstasy, if you missed that, is actually bold. Glossolalia is the language of raving. The primal tongue of fire. It is the original voice of the unconscious mind, and everyone who hears it interprets it differently. Everyone hears what they need to hear. The unconscious speaking directly to the unconscious, invisible speech. What kind of world might we make where such a language would be the common tongue? It's called Twitter, mate. He's literally describing a world, and it's the same world that Shelley wants to have, a world that is constructed out of the apperceptions of people's heads, that everybody hears in the way that they need to hear, or that they want to hear, is kind of the bastardized version that we've ended up with. But the realm of interaction, which uses language as a medium for giving everybody everything they want, is the digital revolution coming around the corner that Morrison is writing about here. I'm not terribly sure what all of this means. I think Morrison was getting it from aliens, like he says he was, and they could see into the future, but they didn't express it in a terribly clear way, and all Morrison was left with was these ideas and images and intuitions that he had to stitch together here. But like, I think I really think The Invisibles is amazing at this point. It's really doing it's making me find helpful issues of the Fortean Times at the right moment, and it looks like a prophecy of the world that we're in now, which is remarkable in its acuity, and within all of this, having a good time raving, Shelley getting high, having a good time dancing, all of that early Rush Coffee, ravey, Silicon Valley tech optimism stuff, which nobody believes in anymore. Not even the tech optimists in Silicon Valley. They're not pretending that they pretend that they worship UFOs now, rather than just capital, rather than just money and power, rather than, the way that they've transitioned from the invisible side to the baddie side, to the outer church, to the archonic side, is such a banal observation that I feel stupid making it. But of course they have. It's all in here. It's literally encoded in this comic about codes. And it's, I don't know, I'm getting carried away, but it's kind of staggering. Asmodeus says, I'm planning on being around to see it. Lots of people want to stop getting there. Like those poor creatures in the church, asks Robin, when one reaches my age, one sees through the struggle, one sees it all for what it truly is, just a game. Would you like to play? I've played enough today, thanks anyway. You don't look that old. No, I never have. Huh. And that's the big spread, guys. We can't leave it yet, though, because we still haven't talked about the Priory of Sion and the Templar mystery and France and Orlando. We just lost Orlando a few pages back. And with him, we lose a certain conception of a type of statehood. One which is built on, like national boundaries, physical landlocked boundaries that can be defended and established. And then the way that gets kind of like treated through history, Westphalian state apparatus. And then, in the middle of the 20th century, all of that gets smashed to pieces in this enormous cataclysm. And we spent 40 years trying to sort of build our economies back together, really. And during that time, embarking on a new type of political project, which is beginning to really gather pace by the time this is published in the early 90s. Mid-90s? Mid-90s. So Orlando is that kind of culture object which binds a specific nation together, is gone. Final Neal Cassady aside. Neal Cassady died in a Mexican town called San Miguel de Allende. I don't know much about San Miguel de Allende, but if any town that's named after St. Michael, that's a big red flag that beforehand there was a massive pagan temple there. So Cassady was the sacrifice that enabled that speedy, rushy, self-reliant, self-creating ruggedness. That was the sacrifice that enabled the nation state as it's symbolized by Orlando, and Orlando as a nexus of control, as a legend used to scare people and inspire people into believing that they're part of this nation. Cassady was the sacrifice that finished it off. If your town is named San Miguel, if your town is named after St. Michael, there was a badass pagan temple there before. St. Michael is like God's hardcore enforcer. He's the battler. He's the one that fights the dragon. So basically all of the gods that Fanny invoked to defeat Orlando also took Death Mask luchador Neil Cassady. Yeah? I mean, come on, come with me. So what's the new structure? If Orlando's gone, what is it that builds the state, right? What is it that builds the apparatus of control or freedom that we are developing anew? ᴥThe, the Priory of Sion. When the Da Vinci Code thing blew up, when that book was just ginormous, you couldn't move for sensible newspapers going, oh, this is all just a hoax, it's all just nonsense. It's all just a hoax, it's all just nonsense. Of course, Christians never worshipped women. Why would they do anything so silly? Of course, there was never a Gnostic element of Christianity which said, hey, maybe you can baptize yourself. Why? Like, don't be so silly. That's silly stuff and nonsense. Let's be sensible. Let's be sensible. Let's take Prozac and be sensible. The truth is more complex than that, and more interesting, to be honest. The Priory of Sion, which is like the name given to this hoax that used the ᴥThe mystery to kind of build out this fake history of an alternative bloodline of French kings who were descended from Jesus and Mary and who had been overthrown during the anti-Cathar crusades of the Middle Ages, and yet kind of remain as a secret seam within French society, ready to pop up again and retake their rightful claim. Or like, this is fantasy, but that doesn't make it not true. It just makes it a bit nonsensy. And the Priory of Sion guys were basically surrealists, inspired by people like Antonin Artaud, French piss takers, basically, pranksters like Ken Kesey, merry pranksters coming up. Actually, not very merry. They were quite. I think they were quite sinister pranksters in many ways, kind of nasty. All of the stuff that the Priory of Sion put out, alongside all of this alternative lineage of Jesus stuff, which is all heavily encoded, there's just loads of other kind of filler. There's just loads of filler, and it's all about like house prices and zoning laws, really like boring, like civic geography nerd stuff about these stretches of land throughout southern France and into Spain. And it's just a joke, supposedly. Like the kind of the sensible broadsheet take was that these surrealists, French piss takers, having a laugh, basically, and it worked. It created an entire industry around it, but it was all just made up for larks by some bored French dudes. Not bored, artistic, and they're using the kind of the credulity of the world as a way to make themselves seem like they're related to Jesus and poke fun at everything and make the media look silly for buying into their made-up story. That's not untrue, such as it goes, although maybe just it is, maybe that, yeah. Anyway, all of the other stuff in all of the Priory of Sion documents, they just look like spook shit. They just look like semi-under-the-radar publications that people involved in a clandestine network of something would use to share information. That's just what it is. These can be literary in-jokes, or they can be something a little bit more serious, a little bit more substantial. Which is to say that the people who were involved in the Priory of Sion that we know of, Pierre Plantard, Gérard de Sède, they were a right motley bunch, basically. One of them was like a radical Trotskyist whose coffin was like draped in the flag of the Soviet Union. One of them was like an ultra-nationalist who kept kind of trying to do. It was like and Vichy collaborationist. They were, what kind of binds them together beyond their surrealism and love of freaking the squares is it's interesting how well they how almost they resemble a cell. As we've seen all of these French cells from these different salons. Yeah, this is like the mid to late 20th century one, and how it caused these weird ripples of its own around European culture. Basically, it's called synarchy, right? It's like a rule of the elite, but the elite is kind of judged by the elite's own standards. Yeah, so it's not aristocracy because you're not inheriting it, you're not getting it from the land. It's synarchy, as in there's a kind of a self-elected. It's basically fascism, right? Or like hard right-wing politics. So the Priory of Sion was basically, I think it's probably true to say, I know that this sounds like I'm buying into my own conspiracy juice a bit too much, but the Priory of Sion, the whole Rennes-le-Château thing, as much as it was a hoax, hiding within the hoax was quite a serious project about linking up fascist stroke far-right groups from Spain to France to northern Italy and to Germany. We kind of think that fascism in Europe just vanished in a puff of smoke overnight after the end of the Second World War. Of course it didn't. Nobody in England certainly ever remembers that Spain was fascist right up until the 70s, when I was born still. There were a shitload of people collaborated with the Nazis in France. Obviously, there's squillions of Nazis left in Germany after the end of the war. We all know about the struggles throughout the 70s and 80s in Italy between various, basically exactly the plot of The Invisibles happening between left-wing and right-wing groups there. I think the Priory of Sion is one of the means by which they linked up and used their influence politically to... I'm not a Brexit guy. To influence the non-democratic tendencies of the EU project. Whatever you think about the EU, it's not democratic. It is a synarchy. It is based upon a rule of elites, and these elites aren't they're not like Teutonic warrior elites. They're like bureaucrat elites, right? They're guys who are good at schmoozing and doing contracts and spreadsheets and bank tariff shit. Just the most boring. All of those boring, faceless Brussels bureaucrats. That's who the synarchists are. And so when Orlando is gone, when that kind of embodied or half embodied, as Orlando is, and violent means of establishing and inspirational means of establishing what the state structure means and does and looks like. When you haven't got that, the next thing that comes along is basically the clandestine elite rule of the synarchists in Rennes-le-Château, plus digital tech, the head of John the Baptist. That's the world that we've got now. It comes from those elements. The thing that replaces Orlando is the thing that replaces the legend of Orlando is the legend of Rennes-le-Château. I don't know. It's been troubling me what the Virginia Woolf Orlando means, because since you notice in this issue that the fact that Fanny is trans really screws him up, whereas the most famous version of Orlando in the West nowadays is the one where she switches gender quite happily. I think that's Virginia Woolf's way to make the British state resilient after women have got the vote and entered the workplace after the First World War, and a Britain that has to understand itself as modern and heterodox in terms of the way that it relates to not just the Empire, but let's face it, the Commonwealth, and the rest of the world. A world which isn't defined by what Britain says it is anymore. I think that's why Woolf felt that trope needed to be evolved in the way that she chose to do it, with Orlando's gender shifting being a metaphor for modernism, the state having to incorporate female suffrage and relations with the wider world. I think that's what that's about, as an aside. Over the page. Man, we thought he got into it deep previously. Whew. So, the language, right? We've had our elf language, we've had our angel language, we've had our computer language. Now, how would you describe this? It's poetry, pure bloody poetry. We get these lines on the next page from the Euganean hills. Shelley is rereading the work that he's just done. He sees Mary and Will, their remaining child, and Claire Claremont. Claire's the one you want to hang out with. Claire's the nice one. Claire's the one who would speak to you at a party. It's Claire. Claire's the cool one. He's reading these lines back to himself, and suddenly the idea that he had about, like, no, it's cool, you can just create utopia in your brain, and that's like enough, yeah. Suddenly you believe him because you're reading his words, and it's just transcendently beautiful. It's just some of the nicest lines, just some of the. So it's like, what if you can turn language into this thing which creates what the H.E.A.D hedonic engineers would call somatic rapture, just bliss. Just music, language that's so beautiful that it turns something on in inside you and makes you a better person just by contact with it, through the aesthetic experience of it, through the music of it. I won't read it all out, but you should go and read it all to yourself, because it is properly amazing. Like, this is where you're like, this is why Shelley's in this comic, is because, you know, he can do a thing with language that Blake couldn't do, that Byron couldn't do, like pretty much nobody this side of Shakespeare, or I want to say Scott Fitzgerald, kind of. He, like, some of his work in The Tender is the Night, that makes me tingle in the same sort of way. But this is just gorgeous. This is just beautiful poetry, and it's kind of like the bit where you realise that the world of, like, the language constructed world can be something truly beautiful and redemptive, and create the new world, create this, he describes it as like a healing paradise, a bower, like a blooming cove, basically like a sheltered space, but a space nonetheless, a territory where utopia can be had, yeah, unlike the horrible world that we're dealing with. And you believe him at this point. Suddenly his daft theorizing seems very real, because these words flick the switch. They make it seem like it's just there. Well, they actually, they make it just there, because these words don't just create computerized realms of hell. They don't just let gibbering happen and then allow you to come up with your own meaning on top of that, in this kind of terrible, like, postmodern, individualist, nothing means anything kind of register. It's there. It does mean something. It means you're a transformed human to the one you were before you read this a minute ago. And the earth grow young again. Claire, because she's a legend, realises that, Mary and Percy need some wee time. So she takes William off, and, Percy's finished his brilliant poem, and he rushes out to see Mary, and they embrace, and, they can start to piece themselves back together as a couple and as humans, and help each other through the grief of Clara, who just died. And it's lovely. It's our little victory. Sorry, it isn't. Sorry, it isn't. This is so I haven't done this really. I mean, I have, obviously. This has been the whole thing of the issue. But okay, let's just reiterate the whole point. One of the whole points of this podcast, you know, we're aware that it's lively and that this comic can still reach out and grab you by the throat and find old copies of the 14 times for you when you need them. What about that layer that it's not telling you? What about that reading between the lines piece? What about that invisible bit? What is it doing? Well, this scene looked at another way, and in fact there are cues here. It's terrifying. It's just terrifying. This is absolutely terrifying. And I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but I am going to read out this first paragraph. With folded wings they waiting sit for my bark to pilot it to some calm and blooming cove where for me and those I love may a windless bower be built. The they that he's talking about there, with folded wings, they waiting sit. They're basically, you know, they're okay. So obviously, you know, it's quite a familiar image of boats being pulled by birds on string. Yeah, that's like a nice poetic image. That's kind of just like a familiar image, like a story shape that you can grasp easily, isn't it? So these, but that's not what they are. These aren't like poetry birds that are going to pull his ship to Utopia. The line before this is quite clear about them. They're air spirits. Yeah? Do you remember back when we were doing the issue 3 when Jack swaps his eyes for a pigeon and learned the lesson? And the lesson, as I tried to describe it then, is basically feed the pigeons, because birds are, as far as our earliest records of like worship of like other contact are, birds are the thing that the terrible spirits, terrible in the scary and the awesome sense of the word, you know, this place terrible is, yeah, remember? Este. Avian spirits. All those hundreds of years of Christian iconography still haven't stamped that out. Angels, like the badasses of the non-human celestial realm, still come with wings, right? So these angels are pulling this bark to Utopia that Shelley's talking about. And we know that they are at best ambivalent, right? Potentially antagonistic to human sensibilities. Claire says, "Come with me, William. Let's go to the river and see the ducks." William is being taken away by Claire, who's a legend, not blaming her, to see the ducks. These things that are pulling Shelley towards Utopia, that are compelling him, that aren't giving him the choice that he thinks he has, these scary air spirits. The spirits of the air, envying us, may even entice to our healing paradise the polluting multitude, but their rage would be subdued by that climb divine and calm. This guy Asmodeus, he's just an angel by any other name too, right? He's just a fallen angel. He's just the devil. He's the devil. William, cute little lad here, would be dead within months, just like his sister Clara. This grief that Shelley is poetrying his way out of happens again in 6 months. Again, these people, these poor people, poor old Mary and Percy, are thrown. I've just been attacked by my cat. Are thrown into hell again. You're a bastard. You scared me then. By these feathery spirits, ducks, that are compelling Shelley to be the man that he is and to have the visions that he is. Remember how I said about how he got abducted in one of the other poems that we were talking about in the Revolt of Islam? This isn't good news. And there are cues. There's too much shadow here and here for this to be a truly happy scene. This isn't, remember, this isn't a pretty flower being crumpled and kind of delivered into the sea of time, or the river of time, like Mary was doing when she crumpled up that daffodil before. This is just an autumn leaf. This is just life getting worse. This is just autumn happening. This is just things getting harder. The subtext of this page is terrifying, because these avian spirits that are pulling his bark, they're going to take his boy within 6 months of this scene taking place. William is dead of malaria. That happened. All of this stuff about the Shelley and Byron kids is terrifying. It's terrifying. It's horrible. And we really need to be aware of that invisible message that's happening in this page, because it provides a colour and a texture to what could actually be going on, and what the stakes involved in this comic are, which is really important to consider. So that spread is just about horror, really. Not spread, just a single page is about horror, really. And Shelley's kind of punishment for the crime of daring to dream of a better world could come from our guy Asmodeus here, as we're going to be calling him, because he wants you to create an empire. But maybe the empire that he wants you to create is one of Shelleyness. Maybe it all kind of has its romantic heart and is a better world. Maybe it does make the earth grow young again through its existence. Maybe the microcosm does bounce up into the sky and reflect the macrocosm. There's a lot going on, but but once you kind of notice that sinking feeling, it's quite hard to get away from when it comes to that page. And straight over the page, we have our guy, the Golden Age Sandman again, who, as we've established, looks a lot like the Cyphermen, one of the baddies. In fact, as far as the fabric of this comic book object is concerned, that's entirely what the Sandman is. This Sandman. Spicy, dangerous, thrilling, murderous, mysterious, weird, real pulp fiction, Sandman Mystery Theatre, the Tarantula. Yeah, it reflects well on the preceding page, this advert. Cracking picture as well. Is that Guy Davis, or is that Matt Wagner? Maybe it looks a lot like his kind of painted style. Yeah, but it's great the way he's pulling aside the curtain. I love the look of these Sandman Mystery Theatres. I must get into them. They look well sweaty and dirty in the good way, All right, yeah. So we've had some pretty intense pages foregoing. There's been a hell of a lot going on. Kind of maybe in terms of thematic density, maybe the most we'll get out of the entire series. It's been a long time since I've reread the later issues, so we'll have to see. I am looking forward to them relaxing a little bit for a couple of issues at least, hopefully. But anyway, over the page, onto this spread, onto pages 21 and 22. It's great because I don't have to say much about these at all. I could go through them really quickly. Basically, everyone's back in the windmill. They're all awake again. They're inspecting the wreckage of Orlando being all sticky and gross. Fanny's okay, but she says she still smells like dirt after having been possessed by your man ᴥThe there. So I just need to get a book that I can stick my cup of tea on. It's not tea, it's just water. It's too late in the evening to be drinking tea. But what it does happen here is that the penny is dropping with King Mob that they're being found too soon. If this is happening within a day or two of them leaving the school classroom hideout in Soho, they are definitely being, they're definitely being chased down. They're not having much rest and respite. They're not putting much distance between them and their pursuers, basically. So yeah, he's right to be worried about the fact that Orlando shouldn't have known where they were. Jack is saying, I shot him and he didn't fucking die, and he's really pissed off about it missing a finger, and he's in fucking agony. And he's being very sarcastic and moody about it. Unfortunately, that moodiness expresses itself through some more of his homophobia with the woman who, did just kind of save his life a bit. Although, what we see sign of there is the two of them working together really well. And that's that's something to watch out for later. But he is really pissed off, and he's like, "Fuck you lot! This is like, this is rubbish." And King Mob makes the classic Mace Windu error of being like, "Oh, whatever, get over it. It's the Invisibles. Well, this just happens. This is the Invisibles, Jack. Weird shit goes on all the time." Which is just it's like, yeah, it's the Mace Windu problem. If you'd have just given Anakin a few words of encouragement, kind of acknowledge the fact that he was a really good Jedi and good at what he did, you wouldn't have all those dead younglings on your hands, would you? A little bit of warmth, a little bit of generosity can go a long way, especially when you're dealing with moody, gifted youngsters. I mean, it's not rocket science, bold guys. It's just like, get with it. So yeah, but Jack's not happy. He's pissed off, and it's funny. I like the way that he is genuinely cross, isn't kind of just sliding into like superhero style, coping. He's cross and upset about the fact that he nearly died and got his finger cut off. And it's good. Sets up some stuff. And yeah, King Mob, for all that we've been just seeing how kind of charming and good at parties he can be, he's a dick. Over the page, there's an advert for the Vertigo Tarot. And it's using as its illustration card 0, the Fool, with this Dave McKean illustrated thing of John Constantine. Vertigo Comics' resident expert magician. I would have thought he'd have made a better card number 1. The Magician card is what he should have been, really. Still, never mind. I am quite a big fan, despite it all, of Dave McKean's all too easily mockable kind of photo collage art style. Stick some cogs on it, basically. Cut a bit of photocopying is the way it goes. I don't recall. I do recall having once kind of had a flick through the Vertigo Tarot, but I would like to pay a bit more attention to it. I suspect that 78 cards in, they get a little bit. They run out of good characters to put in there. I bet you've got some this guy, this is like Lucian from Sandman or something like that. You're like, how disappointing. Yeah. Like, you don't want to do a card reading to tell your fortune and end up with just like some lesser H.E.A.D the Changing Man character or something like that, do you? You don't you're like, come on. Or get Josh from Doom Patrol. You're like, that's not very exciting. I do like Dave McKean's art, but I think this picture here is rubbish. I don't get why Constantine's head is all big and kind of flat and wonky. I just don't think it looks good at all. The dog skeleton, it's all very Dave McKean, obviously, but the dog skeleton is cool. The fool jumping off the hill is cool. But why is Constantine's head all sort of big, like too big? Yeah, I don't like it. There's a lot you can learn from a fool, though. It's the Vertigo Tarot, written by the book that goes with. I bet it's quite a cool thing to have. I'd like to have a flick through one. The book that comes with is by Rachel Pollack. I really rate her. I think she did a brilliant run on Doom Patrol and as a comic writer, and she has written some really good books on the tarot too. I think she used to live around here too. I think she used to live in Brighton for a bit. So good on her. But yeah, that's the Vertigo Tarot. I bet it was expensive. $50 US. God, that doesn't sound much at all actually these days, does it? I bet the card's very shiny. Yeah. I remember a few years ago at the British Library, there was an exhibition on, and one of the things that they had in there was like an original page from Arkham Asylum, the comic that Dave McKean did with Grant Morrison, the Batman comic that Dave McKean did with Grant Morrison, and I was pretty I had cooled on Dave McKean's art, having been a kind of a slightly over intense fan of it in my youth, and then seeing one of his original pages really made me go, oh wow, oh yeah, that's really cool. It felt really hands-on and built up. There was something and it was all collagey, and you could see the bits, you could see the smudges where he glued a bit on, and as an object, the power of it is really apparent. You know, it looks cool, but actually seeing the real one there, it was really like energetic, and I was like, oh yeah, I like that stuff, but I don't get why Constantine's got a big head there. I just don't get it. On to page 23, and we're into our little coda. We're nearly there. We're nearly at the end of Arcadia. There's a lot of shadow going on. There's the shadow of a dog, which again, I think, like this, you know, it connects well to this page because we've got this shadow of a dog. We've got these Watchmen-style graffiti painted silhouettes. We've even got... Yeah, there's another question. We'll get to that in a minute. So that's an obvious like Watchmen reference. But we've got these dogs, right? So the dogs signify both Hecate and the Fool. The Fool is often accompanied by a dog, right? Whether it's a skeletal one or not. But this kid here is about to do what the Fool does, which is kind of jump off the precipice and enter into a different, brighter world, yeah? But it is a foolish thing to do, you know, there's risk. Yeah, lots of shadow going on in these two pages. And remember that kind of like the shadow means a lot and has done within these last 4 issues. And you know, this is a weird couple of pages. I think we're meant to think that this is kind of good. That this guy here, who looks like he's having a pretty unhappy life as a sex worker, he's smoking the blue weed from the tube station, yeah, from issue 2. Yeah, he's getting well high, and he's waiting to be picked up by the Marquis de Sade and his chauffeur, who is the manic pixie goth dream girl that he met at the rave earlier, who's into Terence Mckenna, and who likes to fuck like a dog. Like a dog! Ooh, just noticed that connection. Good one, Bobsy. So there's a doggy thing here. There's a Sirius thing here. Sirius is the dog star and is also the source for the Antonin Artaud quote that the head was saying earlier, remember? So there's a lot of kind of like fairly oblique, but definitely real strands from our previous few issues, like pulling in here. We've got the newspaper flapping in the wind, like we had Shelley's handwritten pages of Julian and Madelot. We've got the little quasi-Venetian canal running through the cobbled streets. There's all sorts of little reminders of where we've been in the past few issues. These kind of weird black flowers, kind of aren't great. I think we're meant to think that this is good, but it's again, I don't think it's I don't think that the subtext is as horrific as the one we're getting with Shelley on that page there. But this guy, he is getting into a car. He's a sex worker, right? Who's getting into a car with the Marquis de Sade, who's going, "Oh, I'm taking you away. We will drown them in the raging torrent of their own unacknowledged fears and desires. I am the divine Marquis. I am de Sade, and I am free at last." It's like, given what we've just seen of what, you know, so basically the de Sade's mission here in the 20th century is to, imagine a new world, to do the Castle of Silling scenario, but good. I guess I wouldn't do that. It sounds really risky. It sounds like a bad idea. And there's a lot of shadow here. It does feel a little bit sinister, and like, you know, again, it's like de Sade looks every inch a supervillain here, and in real life he was a pretty, you know, he definitely kidnapped and tortured people for fun, like, you know, and that's because he was a product of the world that he was in, and now he's going to produce a world of his own when we know full well what his what his fantasies run to. I think it's a risk. He's apparently able to drink champagne even though he's kind of a ghost. I think that maybe he's less of a ghost now because his body back in the past has died, and so it's kind of his, it doesn't really matter. He's just like he's like a fat ghost. It's a bit that's reminded me. I'll leave it. I'll leave it for now. Had a really good comment on Twitter, and my cruel comment about the Marquis de Sade being fat has reminded me of it. If you're listening to this bit, mate, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, but you know who you are. I think it's a mistake to assume, just because we want it to be, that the message of the Invisibles is one of inclusivity. I think that, as Shelley shows us when he points to his temple, the inclusivity that it allows for is like a kind of a radical, transcendent, solipsistic individualism almost. I don't like this is like this 90s moment that it's about running away from collective solutions to the revolution and finding them on an individual basis. And I don't think the reason that seems weird to us now is because it is weird, but it was happening for a reason. And this comic isn't gonna give you the answers that we need in our lives today, although it might have some interesting bits that we can take with us. Sorry that I've just slipped that in right at the end here. I should have mentioned that properly earlier. Like, it is just hilarious. It's like, what? You're letting the Marquis de Sade free in the 20th century to just build a community as he wants it, you know. But fine, let's see how he gets on. I wonder, spoilers, we'll find out in a few issues' time, in quite a few issues' time, actually. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but we will find out what happens to him. And you know, maybe it's not as bad as all that. Maybe I'm over worrying. So Thierry, is it Thierry? I think it is. Yeah, Terry. He's called Terry. Our friend here. They're going to create this new world. They're going to bring Shelley's idea of a enraptured everyday state. They're going to build it. They're going to build it with walls and floors and ceilings. They're going to make it. They're going to make the new universe happen. They're going to produce it using, you know, invisible money and the Marquis de Sade as like a figurehead. And in my mind, you know, he's well high on the blue smoke. And in my mind, I see the sunrise on a new and better world. He pins a blank white badge to the collar of my jacket. I sit in my seat, nameless, invisible, untouchable, breathing blue smoke. I ask him what I should call him, man, Marquis de Sade. I have left the houses of the dead and entered the land of the truly living. I am to be no particular age, no particular sex. I am to be fluid, mercurial. He tells me I must slough my name and my past as a snake sheds its skin. Sorry, slough, not slough. As a snake sheds its skin. Don't go down a reptile rabbit hole, Bobsy. Just don't do it. Snake hole. I think they're in Paris. The final frame is of this city by the riverside. I think it's meant to be Paris. If you look at the bridge and the cobbles and stuff, it's not London. It's not San Francisco. I think it's got to be Paris. It would kind of make sense that, given all the kind of the Frenchified weirdness that we've been in contact with for the past 4 issues, it would like get a chance to redeem itself as a site where, you know, the new world can be built again. We know that. Do we know that, or am I jumping ahead? Yeah, no, we know that another invisible lives in Paris. Remember, Edith, the old lady from way back in issue 1. We know that while I've been doing these monthly read-throughs of these books, we know that Notre Dame burnt down. We know that while I've been doing it, it's been like John the Baptist's day and stuff, you know. Yeah, the Invisibles are still very much there, still really alive, as I'm finding out. I've decided, really, that I'm just going to run with it. That, like, rather than try and, you know, provide in any way, like, a definitive reading of what the Invisibles is about, I'm just going to rabbit hole it. I'm just going to get lost inside the rhizome and, you know, see if I can't reinitiate myself into invisibility. And hopefully I'll be able to come up with enough nonsense that's interesting that'll entice you to come along on the way, whoever you are. And that's the end of Arcadia. That's like the end of what is pretty much the cornerstone story arc of the Invisibles. There's a lot in there, and I got a lot wrong. and I found some things out, discovered some things which I think are really good. Actually, to give myself a little pat on the back. Some of the connections which I didn't think I would find, I think are really lively and are in there. So that's it. And we're on to the letters page. Oh my goodness. We've got the first one from Joshua Michael Neff from Iowa. His one is about being on the cool guy side of high art, low art kind of thing. He seems all right. Grant Morrison agrees with him, and so does Magdalena, who is Grant Morrison's girlfriend at the time or something, I guess. Yep. Mickey Powers has got the next letter. He's from East Norwich, but not East Norwich in Alan Partridge land. Oh no, this is East Norwich, New York, which sounds like it could be quite a cool place. Dear Grant, the only thing worse than life is the alternative. Thanks for making it a little more bearable. Chin chin. What a great letter. The answer is my pleasure, Mickey. That's how Morrison replies, and it's good. Next one, Matthew T. Apple. That could be a made-up name, couldn't it? Matt T. Apple. Matthew the Apple. Apples are a symbol of ours, aren't they? Dear Mr. Morrison, blah 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 blah. Sometimes the plot is not what is most important. The characterization is. Nah, baby, it's just the pictures and the weird connections that fly between them. Don't worry about plot or characterization. F word. Yeah, he doesn't mind the swearing. He has a question about English swear words. Morrison's reply is kind of. He kind of accuses. He accuses Morrison in a very friendly way of kind of neo-colonialism. One last thing, the only thing that bugs me is how nonchalantly you talked about your trips around the world. Even though I liked your rambles, blah, 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 as if the rest of us cared what the weather is like in Australia, and as if we can afford to go. And Morrison gives a little bit of folk etymology around the Anglo-Saxon of the origins of the main swear words, arse, fuck, and cunt, which he still can't say, it still gets censored. He recommends Robert Anton Wilson's book Quantum Psychology for a bit of stuff about why certain words are swear words. I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time since I read that one, but I was a proper Invisibles nerd when I was a kid, so I chased down every single one of these references, and I've definitely got, or I did have, Quantum Psychology by Robert Anton Wilson knocking around somewhere. There's it's a broadly psychoanalytic thing, is that sex equals dirty, so sexual swear words equals dirty words. Which is convincing, I'm not saying that's not right, but also these Anglo, and Morrison says it but doesn't notice because he's got such a blind spot about this stuff, but they're Anglo-Saxon words, that the word fuck isn't a rude word for fucking, it's just the word that the Anglo-Saxons had. So when the Normans came along and took over the country, they said it became the one you weren't allowed to use. You had to use the Norman word for it, which was, I don't know, le fuck or something. Oh my goodness, I hadn't even noticed that. Hadn't even noticed that England is French. Huh. Anyway, sorry, sidetrack. But yeah, the class element of why we're not allowed to swear is more interesting. I think maybe Wilson does go into that. He's not bad on class, Wilson. He's just too sort of baby boomerish about it. As for travelling across the globe, it can be done very cheaply and certainly isn't the exclusive province of the rich. Although Morrison was really rich writing this, he made ridiculous money on Arkham Asylum, and he still could have only been in his late 20s when he was writing this. But round the world air tickets started around $1,000, which $1,000 sounds expensive now. It was really expensive then. It's possible to circumnavigate the Earth on a great deal less money if need be. I also tend to stay in inexpensive hostels or nightmarish, bug-infested hovels, which keeps the cost down and ensures that you meet more interesting people. In places like India or Southeast Asia, you'll find that you can live like a bleeding lord for a few dollars a day. Cheap holidays and other people's misery. I don't think that the Sex Pistols quote absolves you of the problem. It doesn't. He doesn't do email. Next letter is from Barbara Lien. Is this the first letter from a woman? No, it's not. It's definitely not. She's got quite a good point, as has Barbara. What sort of pretentious post-Doors of Perception tripe is this? That somehow drug use can bring enlightenment and make one a rebel. Read Brave New World. She really likes Aldous Huxley. Drug use is nothing but just another way to keep the masses from seeing the problems of our society. Far from religion being the opiate of the people, opiate is now the religion of those who have been too downtrodden by the system to dare to dream, let alone rebel. Like a better translation in the current context for like opiate of the people is medicine for the people. It's not opium as in religion is bad drugs. It's an addiction. It's opium of the people as in the things that brings people peace, the thing that heals them from the alienation of capital. Like that's how Marx was planning to read it. He wasn't telling people off being junkies. And to make John Lennon, he went through and discarded that phase of drug use as a substitute for real creative work. Speaking of drug addicts, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I think that back then in the mid-90s, the Beatles story was a lot more delicately curated than it has been since, to be honest. I think people knew that John Lennon had been into heroin and did have some funny ideas about women. But the kind of like there's just so much stuff on YouTube of him, like obviously off his tits on heroin, like well into the 70s. The idea that he kind of renounced, so Lennon denounced that sort of behaviour in the 1970 Rolling Stone interviews and Plastic Ono Band. He was lying. He was probably on drugs as he was lying. You can't start a revolution on drugs. No one can harm you. Feel your own pain. Don't let them fool you with dope and cocaine. That sounds like a Lennon line, doesn't it? The rhyme on it. And Morrison is a bit snitty with it. Right on, sister, he says in his reply. I think she's got a point, though. Like, as I said earlier, plenty of people in the anti-war movement in the pre-drug 60s say, God damn, the dope and acid slowed us down for a good few years. We know for damn sure, what's his name? Can't remember his name. But like Nixon's advisor a few years ago, he admitted what everyone had known for years was that like black communities were deliberately targeted with cocaine and heroin from the 70s onwards in order to stop them from organising, because the Black Panthers scared the Black Panthers who were friends with Leary, but who Leary definitely shopped in to the CIA and was giving them information. There is some really good stuff with Eldridge Cleaver, like going Brother Leary and stuff like this. But yeah, like dope and acid probably didn't help the anti-war movement terribly well, but there was an upside. There was an upside. Like having good music is good. It's important. Lennon's most disciplined, inventive, and musically revolutionary work was produced during a period when he was either high on speed, cannabis, or LSD. Acid, Revolver. To portray him as a psychedelic deity seems to me to be a perfectly appropriate tribute to the man who wrote Tomorrow Never Knows, possibly the most psychedelic song ever. And this is the bit that Morrison should be relying on, to be honest. That 2-page sequence was, as I've explained before, largely autobiographical. That's how Lennon appeared to me during a specifically designed ritual, and that's how I chose to portray him in what is, after all, a work of fiction. I certainly don't think that drug use can make a person creative or rebellious, but if that person is already creative, then some drug experiences can provide new ways of looking at things and new inspiration. Doesn't happen all the time. Yeah, it's not a brilliant defence of his position, to be honest. And Barbara's point does deserve, as wrong as she is about the Lennon stuff, her wider point does deserve just a little bit more thought. It's when I say that we're going to be trawling through the Invisibles to find things that might be useful, the kind of the contradiction that Barbara highlights there is one of the useful things. Just because she disagrees with Morrison here is not a bad thing. She's from St. Paul, Minnesota. MN? Minnesota? Minnesota, yeah. Is old Barbara. 1738 University Avenue. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm pretty sure that she doesn't live there anymore, because she was probably a student, right? Sorry, I shouldn't read out people's addresses. I'm not going to tell you what the I'm not going to tell you what the what's it called, zip code is, even though it is definitely printed here. Last letter, Laura Adams, address withheld. Sensible girl, Laura. Well done, mate. To the heresiarch, the arch heretic. Bloody brilliant. Chaos magic meets the Illuminati. By the way, I loved Kid Eternity, Annual 1 on Doom Patrol, and I agree totally with your reply about posing. Oh, this is the one about him, why not be a poser, because it's fun, from an earlier letters page a couple of issues ago. Identity is, at its core, simply a matter of who we choose to appear as at any moment. Ask Lord Fanny. ... We're going to get into that, let's say. I'm not inclined to immediately disagree with that statement, but I think if we were to ask Lord Fanny today, in 2019, she would have she'd have a better take on that than she would have done if you'd asked her in the 90s. Definitely, why be one person when you can be 2 or 100? See, in 30 Pilgrims, Grant, I don't know, having 100 person, that sounds scary and unmanageable. I think it might not lead to happiness or liberation at all, that really. I think it would raise some really interesting questions about what the core of what it is to be a person is, but I don't think it's a great consumer choice, given that that's one of the metrics that we're using to judge things in, Next issue. The aftermath of Arcadia in 23. Things fall apart. Jack Frost's had enough and quits the team. An unarmed special unit... An unarmed one isn't much cop, is it? An armed special unit attacks the Invisible's windmill. King Mob reminisces about the long-lost John O'Dreams and the nightmarish smell of honey. It's all action, once again, with guns, bombs, and brutal killings galore. Bang after bang after bang after bang. Can't wait. Can't wait. Sounds right up my alley. Really looking forward to it. Over on the Let Your Spirits page, we've got Oberon of the old Midsummer Night's Dream. Oh my goodness, this is properly Midsummer's Eve, isn't it? Oh no, near enough though. Raising a glass, saying cheers and well done to Arcadia. He doth approve, and well he might. The Vertigo column, as I said, this is first episode of Preacher, which told us a lot about Neil Cassady, which was important. Lovely little on the ledge editorial column from Steve Dillon, R.I.P., greatly missed, one of the great comic book artists of our times. He's kind of like being a little bit broad and kind of pretending that Preacher's dead edgy. I get it, it was at the time, it kind of is a bit still. If edgy, but edgy isn't edgy anymore, is it? Whinging about stuff because you're a bloody bloke isn't edgy anymore. What is this? He says his editorial is a bit like how Vertigo has really helped make people like him stay getting into comics when otherwise they wouldn't have bothered. Yeah, he's kind of bigging himself. He gets letters. They got letters to their run on Hellblazer, informing us of how offended they readers were, and how we, i.e. him and Garth Ennis, the creators of Preacher, who used to work together on Hellblazer, represent a danger to the fabric of society. You didn't. It was only comics, don't worry. Yeah, Preacher, though, love it. God love it. Shade, Hellblazer, by Eddie Campbell and Sean Phillips, our cover artist. Peter Milligan and guest artist Michael Lark on Shade the Changing Man number 58. I bet that's brilliant. Moon Shadow. Mark Miller's one on Swamp Thing. The Chris Weston Nazi one. Worth. Animal Man. Jonah Hex by Joe Lansdale and Tim Truman. I bet that looks good. Mob Fire by Gary Ushaw and Warren Peace. I love Warren Peace's artwork, so I'd like to give that a read. Books of Magic. Ghost Dancing. Jamie Delano and Richard Case. Probably got its moments. Invisible's number 8, which we've just read. Tank next month. Tank Girl movie adaptation. We've had a word about that. Sandman Mystery Theatre trade paperback. And The Endless Gallery. I'm sure that's only one of the words to describe what the feeling of reading it would be. This marvellous advert for Kiss of Death, a movie that no one's ever heard of, starring David Caruso, Samuel L. Jackson and Nicolas Cage. Some lovely makeup on the lads here. I mean, I know they're younger, But look at how much makeup. Even in this sepia photo Nicolas Cage is wearing there. By Barbet Schroeder, pardon me. Yeah, one of those like post-Pulp Fiction things. Looks rubbish, frankly. And, you know, the guy from NYPD Blue in it, when he was like a huge star, yeah. He's really good in King of New York, and that's all. Final page, Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh. The sequel. I don't even know if I've seen this, you know. First Candyman's really good. I haven't seen this one. Oh man, I'm losing real points, aren't I? I'm saying that this film basically doesn't exist because it's so obscure. And there's going to be millions of people watching this because millions of people do watch this podcast, actually. Going, no, it's actually a really good film. Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh. I've not seen it, but great advert. Really cool poster artwork. Really cool. Honeycombs. Is there stuff about bees and honey? I think there is in the next issue. Like, again, I think there's maybe a bit of a pattern beginning to emerge that the final, like, so the first advert, the interior cover advert, is about the issue ahead, and these back page adverts are maybe about the next issue. So let's test that. Let's test that hypothesis next time round. See if there's any kiss of deathy, Candyman-y stuff in The Invisibles issue number 9, which we will return to in our next issue-sode, which I'm really looking forward to. That's it. It's been another epic one. Maybe the next one will be shorter, but who knows. Thanks ever so much for watching. Do the Patreon stuff. Shout at me and call me an idiot on Twitter at BobsyMindless. But like, yeah, come along for the ride. We're probably gonna crunch all 50 billion of these bloody Invisibles issues, and it's probably gonna drive me nuts. But that's the vibe now. Like I said a few minutes ago, into the rabbit hole. We've broken the back of Arcadia. We know what we're letting ourselves in for. Things are definitely popping beneath the surface of this comic, and we're going to go in. Come along. Join. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye now, bye.